we see a blonde guy named Xiaonan holding the unconscious body of a girl and apologizing to her. The girl's name is Linka, and in order to cure her, the guy created the most powerful artifact. He wanted to sell it, but was cruelly deceived by the buyers. The blonde couldn't understand why all this was happening to him. After Xiaonan was deceived, power entered his body. The blonde decided that he had to take control of everything and see how the force could help him. The guy decides that he finally has an opportunity. He remembers Linka and thinks that he now has the opportunity to get her back on her feet. After the accident, Linka can no longer walk, but she is still attached to Xiaonan. Returning to the past, we see the well from the inside and how blood flows down its wall. The boy cries heartbreakingly and apologizes to the girl, who is unconscious. The blonde is also wounded, but continues to ask the girl to wake up. This girl is Linka, but she does not respond to the boy's pleas. The blonde man wakes up with a loud scream and jumps up, stretching his hand forward as if trying to reach something. Xiaonan freezes with his hand outstretched towards the computer and realizes that he dreamed it all. The blonde rubs his head and says that his vision has returned and is now harder to suppress. After a few seconds, his attention is drawn to something displayed on the monitor. Frozen in place, the guy peers at the screen, trying to figure out if he is still asleep. On the screen, we see an image of a red sword, which is called the Sword of Sin. The blonde looks at him in surprise. When he realizes that he is not dreaming, he jumps up and joyfully shouts that he has succeeded. A female voice comes from behind the door of the room, asking if Xiaonan called someone. The guy picks up the laptop and leaves the room, telling Linka what he has accomplished. The girl sits in a wheelchair and asks what he is talking about. Xiaonan shows her the screen and says that he got the only weapon in the north that many people are willing to pay for, so he has already put it up for auction. Linka says that this is wonderful and reminds him that college entrance exams are starting soon, so the boy will be able to pay for his own education. Hearing her words, the guy freezes in place. Xiaonan says he wants to use this money to get the girl back on her feet. The blonde reminds Linka that he says he will definitely find a way. The girl asks why the guy is so obsessed with this, because what happened then was not his fault. Linka says that Xiaonan shouldn't take all this on himself, but he interrupts her, saying that he should be responsible for the girl. The blonde sits down in front of her and asks if she wanted to become a dancer. Xiaonan gently takes the girl's leg. With a smile on his face, he says that he will definitely find a way to help Linka. The girl looks at him in amazement and wants to say something. However, she is interrupted by a notification that arrives on Xiaonan's laptop. The guy grabs the laptop and says that someone already wants to transfer him 100,000 for the Sword of Sin. Xiaonan runs out of the room, telling the girl that he is running to lunch and that she should not wait for him. Linka watches the guy leave. She looks away in embarrassment and says that the guy is very stupid to take this burden on himself. Sometime later, Xiaonan arrives at the meeting place appointed by the buyer. The guy thinks that these places are familiar to him and the buyer is probably a local. Xiaonan recalls that he will be paid 100,000 in cash, but he thinks this place is too remote. The blonde is checking the location on his phone when a silhouette appears behind him and asks if the guy's name is Nan Fengluo. The guy answers positively and names the buyer, asking whether he met the right person. A tall, muscular guy says that this is his husband's name and invites her to go to him. Xiaonan follows him shyly, thinking that the guy has very specific tastes. The tall guy raises his hand and tells the boss that they have arrived, which greatly surprises the blonde. Xiaonan begins to realize that something is wrong here and turns his gaze to the customer. A tall guy in a leather jacket walks towards the blonde and keeps laughing. The guy addresses Xiaonan by his real name and asks if he misses him. The blonde recognizes the guy as Huang Qifan, who had cheated him in the past and taken his equipment without paying. People begin to gather around Xiaonan, and Qifan says that he was surprised that the blonde could create weapons. Qifan offers the guy to give him the weapon voluntarily, otherwise they will beat him and take it by force. Xiaonan remembers how it happened in the past, but he is not going to give up. Turning sharply, the blonde tries to escape from the gang. However, he is almost immediately caught by the hood of his hoodie. The guy Xiaonan met first pushes the blonde back. They start beating the guy severely. After knocking Xiaonan to the ground, the gang starts hitting him, saying that the guy can't escape from them anyway. Sometime later, Qifan approaches the guy lying on the ground and orders his subordinates to stop. However, his pity lies in the fact that he considers Xiaonan to be a golden goose that can lay golden eggs. Qifan says that the blonde is a fine specimen, so nothing should happen to him. Xiaonan can only lie on the ground, thinking about what he did wrong. The blonde remembers that he promised Linka that he would do everything to help her become a dancer. That's why he's now clutching the stone tightly in his hand. Xiaonan jumps up from the ground and tries to hit the offenders with a stone. However, he doesn't have time to do anything because Qifan kicks him. Xiaonan is thrown to the side and almost smashes his head against the rocks. But the next moment, an unknown force begins to overwhelm him, forcing him to rise. At the point of contact with the stone, a light appears on the guy's forehead. Xiaonan feels like he's transported to another space, where he sees that the crafting system has been activated and a test run has been launched. The guy looks around and tries to understand how he ended up in this place. The system informs him that materials are available for processing. In front of him appears a piece of rebar, a used video card, the skeleton of an unknown animal, and a piece of wood. A cube appears in front of the guy and the system notifies that the materials have been confirmed and the transformation begins. The individual parts of the cube begin to form into a single whole, and after some time, everything takes its place and the system announces success. Xiaonan reaches out to the cube and says it is impossible. All this time, Qifan's gang sees the guy lying motionless on the ground, but at some point, lightning and clots of energy begin to burst out of his body. One of the guys asks where the lightning came from and if everything will be okay with them, to which Qifan answers vaguely and gets ready to leave. He is suddenly drawn to Xiaonan's voice, asking if it was Qifan who wanted to acquire the Sword of Sin. The gang turns in surprise towards the guy who was previously lying on the ground. Xiaonan stands in front of them with a raised red sword and asks what they think about it. The blonde jumps up and runs towards the guys. Running closer, he raises his sword over them, from which red flashes of lightning begin to emanate. The guys think there's something wrong with the sword and start arguing. But Xiaonan has already struck the first blow with his sword. Following the direction of the sword, flashes begin to diverge, blinding the gang. Against the backdrop of the evening city, a red glow spreads, with bright red lightning. When the lights go out, we see Zifan's gang crouched on the ground, covering their ears, trembling in fear. Qifan opens her eyes and sees that nothing happened and they are alive and well. The guys get up from the ground and look at each other, trying to find damage on the body. Meanwhile, Xiaonan looks at the sword in confusion and finds out that it is just a toy that looks and lights like the real thing. The blonde starts cursing at the system because he thought the sword was real, but he was set up. Qifan is angry at being deceived and sends his henchmen to catch up with Xiaonan. Taking advantage of their momentary hesitation, the blonde takes off and runs away. A cube appears next to Xiaonan again, and the guy asks what it is, because they are not in Manhwa, so there is a system nearby. The cube does not answer his questions. He asks to insert more than 2 materials. Xiaonan thinks about these words and begins to look around. On the sides of it, there are many objects and their cards with properties. However, Xiaonan doesn't have time to think and choose, so he grabs whatever comes to hand. These things become a metal pipe, a glove, and a firecracker. The blonde throws all the materials into the cube, ordering this time to create a decent weapon. A few moments later, the system notifies that after combining the materials, the guy managed to create the Devil's Hand. A huge glove appears on the guy's right hand, covering his hand from his fingertips to his shoulder and resembling a monster's paw. Xiaonan turns to face his pursuers and puts his hand forward, and a mouth appears in the middle of his palm. Qifan freezes in place, wondering if this is another trick. At this point, the glove begins to suck in foreign objects. Small and large objects are caught by air currents and rush towards Xiaonan. The banana peel ends up on Qifan's head, who begins to swear and threaten the blonde. Xiaonan says he can't do anything about it because it's his first time using the device. The blonde makes a joke about the guy's new hairstyle and starts running away, while Qifan orders his men to catch up with Xiaonan and beat him up. The next moment, the glove begins to throw out everything that it had collected earlier, and all these objects fly towards the guys. At some point, Xiaonan stops in place. The blonde sees an obstacle in his path that is not easy to overcome. The glove begins to dissolve into thin air just as Xiaonan realizes he's at a dead end. The blonde catches movement behind him and turns around. Qifan caught up with him and now looks at Xiaonan angrily, asking why he doesn't run away. The blonde realizes that he is in a hopeless situation. Xiaonan looks at the cube and says that they have nowhere to retreat, so the weapon this time should not be bad. The guy directs his powers and some materials into the cube, saying that now everything depends on the system. A second later, a huge metal shark appears next to the guy, and the system says that the guy created an explosive shark and received 1 point. Qifan looks at the object in shock and shouts that this is impossible. Xiaonan, in turn, looks at the rocket with enthusiasm. The blonde runs up to the object and grabs the handles. The next moment, the rocket soars into the air and Xiaonan, sitting on it, waves goodbye to Qifan. The gang stayed where they were, watching the blonde man as he left on the rocket, trying to understand what had just happened. One of the guys turns to Zifan and asks if they should go back. Meanwhile, Xiaonan is already far from the ambush site. As the rocket approaches the ground, legs emerge from its body and it lands on them. Xiaonan jumps off the rocket as its engine dies. A system appears in front of the blonde, asking if the guy wants to add this weapon to the magic book. The guy rubs his chin thoughtfully, thinking that the system works like a warehouse. Xiaonan remembers that he had never even received advice before and decides to look into the weapon's features. The book cover spreads out in different directions like a gate and begins to absorb the rocket. The shark-shaped rocket slowly sinks into the book, breaking into pixels. When it was all over, the system showed Xiaonan a photo of the weapon and its characteristics. The guy learns that the weapon is ordinary. The special thing is that it is a flying machine in the form of a shark. Xiaonan decides to deal with everything later and now heads towards home. A cold blue eye appears from the pitch darkness. An unknown human-like creature says that the most powerful system has been activated. The creature looks at the 9 burning symbols and says that the game has begun. Meanwhile, early morning dawns in the city. Xiaonan has already come home and is now sitting at the table studying the new system. The system describes the item, Duarian headphones, calling them the first tastefully selected headset for young people. A restless clock, an alarm clock that never stops as long as it is wound up. However, the system reports that items without features cannot be saved, to which Xiaonan begins to scold. The book states that the owner's stats cannot be changed without higher-level items. Xiaonan calls this nonsense and decides to see what is in this book. The blonde sees a tribal leather shield and a heavy iron sword, which from the description looks very ordinary. The book also has 2-star weapons, and the system says that 2 1-star items can be used to create 1 2-star item. Xiaonan thinks that this is an interesting scheme and asks how many stars the best things have. The system says that 3 2-star hotels can be made into 1 3-star hotel, and 4 3-star hotels can be made into 1 4-star hotel. Xiaonan starts searching the system for information about 5-star items. The guy finds a photo of 5-star items that are listed in the Book of Magic Weapons. Each of these items is distinguished by its beauty, and each has its own unique feature. Xiaonan begins to suspect that he is not the only person who possesses the system, since these items were not created by him. While the guy was studying the system and 5-star items, he came across something that amazed him. He sees an object called artificial limbs that can restore even a disabled person to his former state. Xiaonan recalls that soldiers used a similar item in winter. The guy shouts that he absolutely must get this 5-star gear, because this is Linky's chance to get back on his feet. His joy is interrupted by a hand made of pixels that appears from the system's eye. The moment the hand grabs the surprised Xiaonan by the neck, he starts cursing. The guy grabs the hand and tries to remove it from his neck. However, he begins to get sucked into the system faster than he can do anything. The hand disappears from his neck and he finds himself back inside the pixel space. Xiaonan looks around but doesn't notice the girl who decides to call him. The girl tells him that when she kills him, she will become the ruler of the fighting world. Xiaonan asks her who she is and why she dragged him here. The girl looks at him predatorily and says that he doesn't need to know this. She says that the guy will soon die and immediately rushes at him, raising her sword over him. Xiaonan tries to cover himself from the blow with his hands, and at that moment, a transparent barrier appears around him. When the sword touches the barrier, the blade splits into several pieces and the girl flies to the side. Xiaonan looks at what is happening in surprise and looks at himself, wondering why nothing happened to him. The girl holds a crumbling sword in her hands and says that she's been dead for thousands of years, and asks why the guy is trying to stop her. A cube appears next to Xiaonan, recommending the use of a magic book to defeat the 6-star spirit warrior Pandora. The system informs that in case of failure, a punishment will be applied to him, loss of soul and control over the combat sphere. Pandora looks at the confused Xiaonan and asks if the mortal wants to fight her. The girl begins to create a weapon out of thin air and says that he can watch as she kills him. When the creation procedure was completed, the girl grabbed the handle of the weapon. Now the girl holds a new weapon in her hand, the Yabite sickle. Pandora charges at Xiaonan, who is surrounded by a sphere-shaped shield. She strikes one blow after another and the blonde sees that the shield begins to crack. Xiaonan tries to understand whether the girl is saying that she wants to gain control over the system. He understands that Pandora really wants to kill him, but he doesn't understand why she wants to. Xiaonan understands that the girl is serious because the shield crumbles under her blows. With a kick, Pandora sends the blonde flying to the side. The girl says that such an old shield cannot save Xiaonan. A guy sees a girl create a weapon out of thin air and decides he can do it too. Extending his hand to the side, Xiaonan summons an echo of the heavenly weapon. Contrary to his expectations, only a club appears in his hand, causing the boy to scream in despair. Pandora laughs at his attempts and says it's a funny trick. Having transformed the sickle back into a sword, the girl rushed towards the defenseless Xiaonan. With one swing of her sword, the girl cuts off the blonde's right hand. Xiaonan begins to scream in horror, but instead of blood flowing from his severed limb, pixels come out. The system notifies the guy that the value of his soul has dropped below 70%. The guy realizes that the red bar above his head reflects his life level, and the system says that when the scale drops to 0, Xiaonan will die. The blonde thinks that it really hurts, so if they hit him, he will definitely die. The girl says that she doesn't understand why the fighting world chose him, because in her opinion, he is an ordinary person. Pandora says that Xiaonan is not fit to become the ruler of this world. The girl rushes into battle and delivers several more blows to the blonde. Xiaonan tries to understand the requirements of owning this world and how to create various weapons. The system reports that Xiaonan's soul value is less than 20%. The blonde doesn't understand why he only creates a stick, while the girl creates a variety of weapons. The guy stretches out his hand and tries to create the weapon again, thinking that he can't sit back and do nothing. As Pandora strikes, her sword collides with the shield the boy managed to create. The girl says that she sees this material for the first time and considers it too fragile for this world. Due to the impact, the shield cracked, and Xiaonan was amazed that the girl had never seen such a thing. The blonde thinks that the girl might be a system created by the owner, because she's over 1,000 years old. Pandora begins to create new weapons and says that only those who have held a real magical weapon in their hands can call themselves a master. The next moment, a heavenly axe appears in the girl's hands. Xiaonan begins to transform his shield into a new weapon, an anti-explosive shield. Pandora is not familiar with this material, but she believes that she can break through it, so she is determined to win and attacks. The axe crashes into Xiaonan's shield and shatters it into pieces. The blow hits the blonde as well, and a stream of pixels starts coming out of his mouth. Xiaonan, screaming in pain, is carried away by the blast wave. The system reports that his soul value has dropped below 10%, and the guy wonders if it's time for him to die. He remembers how he and Linka were playing a video game, and she said she lost. She asked Xiaonan how he could play any game so well. Then the guy answered her with a smile that every game has its own tactics for winning. Once you master the rules of the game, you can determine its outcome. Now Xiaonan only thinks about the fact that he couldn't understand the rules of this game. Pandora is unfamiliar with the materials and weapons he uses. Xiaonan makes another attempt to create a weapon, thinking that he has not yet fulfilled his promise to Linka. Pandora was about to deliver the finishing blow, but she was blinded by a bright flash. She looked at the blonde man in surprise. Gathering all his strength, Xiaonan created a large electric cannon. Taking advantage of the fact that the girl has slowed down, the blonde shoots at her. Without encountering any obstacles, the boy finally managed to injure Pandora. In the smokescreen, Xiaonan sees the silhouette of a girl. A cannon shot tore off Pandora's arm and leg. The girl said that it was impossible and asked what kind of weapon it was and how he, being a weakling, was able to create it. Xiaonan says it's a charged particle gun and boasts that he's finally figured out the rules of the game. The girl smirks when she hears his words and her shoulder starts to glow. Soon the girl's severed arm grows back, gathering from pixels. Raising her hand up, Pandora summons a multitude of swords and says that she is the law here. The girl says that she is the master of Pandora's most powerful weapon, so she will be the winner in this battle. She points a huge number of swords towards Xiaonan, but he doesn't seem to be scared. The blonde says that times are changing, so modern technology should not be underestimated. The guy resorts to transformation, which causes the girl to freeze in place. In front of her now stands a huge robot, from which all the swords fly off and crumble into dust. The robot's glowing red eyes settled on the girl. The robot was so big that it could squeeze the girl between its palms, which it tried to do. Pandora tried to fight and threatened that she only had a third of her strength. But in a year, she would fully recover and return. Xiaonan says that no matter how long it takes her, he will become even stronger in that time. The girl threatens him that he will take his words back the next time they meet and says that she will be the one who kills him. Her body begins to crumble under the pressure of the robot, and the girl tells Xiaonan to remember her words. The next moment, the robot's palms touch, crushing Pandora. Xiaonan opens his arms and sees that the girl is no longer between them. Immediately after this, the space begins to disintegrate into many pixels, and the guy finds himself in his room. Xiaonan realizes that he has returned to reality, so he falls to his knees in relief. He looks at his hands and says there is no pain, but he remembers the feeling, so it is not his imagination that is playing a trick on him. After a few moments, a smile blossoms on his face. Xiaonan clenches his fists and trembles with happiness, as he is very glad to be alive. A cube appears next to the blonde, which informs him of a new task: defeat Pandora in a year and become the true ruler of the fighting world. Xiaonan gladly accepts this quest because he doesn't care whether he dies or lives, but he needs to get 5-star equipment for Linke. As he brings his hand to the cube, the boy thinks that he needs to do something important first. He decides not to do it at home, but to go to the hangar. There, a guy experiments with creating weapons using different materials. Once again, he succeeds in creating only the perfect non-stick frying pan. Xiaonan looks at it from all sides, but still doesn't see anything surprising in this object. He throws the frying pan aside, thinking that once again he has failed. The blonde falls into a chair and begins to think about what the trick of this synthesis is. Xiaonan had been in this hangar for 3 days already, but he still hadn't created a single 3-star weapon. The guy spent all his savings and rented a warehouse for materials, but nothing worked out for him. The blonde remembers the space he found himself in a few days ago. He doesn't understand why he could create any weapon there, but in real life it doesn't work. Xiaonan makes it clear with his feelings what kind of weapon he wants to create. He suggests that the problem may be in the materials. The blonde remembers how he and Linka played together and created weapons. There, the guy had to collect a certain amount of necessary materials. Only after this was he able to create a weapon. Linka was surprised that the guy could create a completely different weapon from a few items. Xiaonan explained to her what materials needed to be collected to create this or that weapon. The girl understood this system, but asked why a hammer could not be made from these materials. Xiaonan replied that they couldn't choose in the game and suggested that Linka try playing the game too. The guy said that the girl was smart, so she could handle it. Remembering this, Xiaonan thinks that he has freedom in this world. The guy understands that in this system it is possible to create any weapon, but different types of weapons are made from the same materials. So Xiaonan thinks that the solution to the whole problem is his conscious control over the characteristics of each material. The blonde takes an iron pipe and a frying pan in his hand and begins to create. He manages to correctly set the direction of the object's formation, and as a result, he gets a machete. Taking it in his hand, the guy thinks that this can be considered a success, but it is far from perfect. Taking a kitchen knife in his other hand, the guy imagines that the shape of the handle emphasizes the sharpness of the blade of the kitchen knife. Finally, Xiaonan succeeds in creating a standard enhanced blade. The guy twirls it in his hands and thinks that it is really a lot of fun. Xiaonan continues to figure out the system and doesn't notice that Pandora's silhouette is watching him from the side. For some reason, the girl blushed and sighed heavily. She disappears into thin air as quickly as she appeared, remaining unnoticed by Xiaonan. Time goes by and the guy still doesn't leave the barn. After some time, the guy manages to create something special. He created his first 1-star weapon, a sword that destroys weapons of a lower rank but does not harm enemies. Xiaonan says the last time he was this lucky was when he found a stash behind a store. Now he knows that rare materials can be used to create stellar weapons. The blonde notes that the weapon is so light that it seems weightless, which makes his movements more dexterous. Suddenly his phone starts vibrating, which distracts the guy from his task. Taking the phone in his hands, Xiaonan finds out that it is Linke calling him. When the guy accepts the challenge, the girl starts screaming that someone has come to their house. Xiaonan tries to ask her what happened, but the call is abruptly cut off. Meanwhile, Linka is at home, and the call was interrupted because the phone fell out of her hands. The girl pressed the stroller against the door, preventing the strangers from entering the room, but they continued to knock on the door. People insist that the girl open the door for them, otherwise they will act more rudely. Without waiting for action from Linka, the strangers knock down the door, causing the girl to fall out of her wheelchair. 2 guys enter the room and look around the space, looking contemptuously at the girl. Linka guesses that the guys are most likely Huang Shifan's people. The boys ignore her questions, and one of them says that Linka is Xiaonan's disabled girl. The guy reaches out his hand, trying to grab the girl, and says that she should come with them. Linka thinks that if she is taken away, Xiaonan will be in trouble. The girl clutches the stun gun behind her back and checks if it works. Linka orders the boys to leave her house immediately. The guy doesn't like her tone, so he says that the girl should have already realized what situation she is in. He says that she shouldn't have contradicted them, but his words are interrupted by a crash in the hallway. It was Xiaonan who didn't take into account that his movement speed had increased by 10 times, so he crashed into the wall. Linka can't see him, but she can hear his voice, but she can't believe that he came so quickly. Xiaonan comes into the room and says that the guys are not doing well by bullying the girl. The guy starts to take the sword out of its sheath. Taking up his star sword, he asks if the boys understand what all this means. Meanwhile, we are transported to the Black Lion's dining room in a destroyed warehouse. Chefs prepare steaks from a large carcass and hand them to waiters. Several pieces of steak appear in front of the man, who immediately begins to eat. He has sharp teeth with which he bites into the meat served to him. Sifan watches in surprise as the man empties more than one plate. The guy offers the man to bring something to drink, for example, a bottle of French wine. The man ignores his question and asks where Zifan's people are now and how things are going with them. The guy says that there will be news soon, and that they have found a person from whom they can get the game weapon. Chifan also says that his original target was not Linke, so the guy sent the guys to her so that they could have some fun. The man interrupts him, saying that he doesn't understand why they needed this girl at all. The master learned that Xiaonan can create objects out of thin air, so he really wants to meet him in person. Chifan thinks that Xiaonan is just playing tricks on them, but the man says that he is wrong. The beast-like man thinks that if all the rumors about the guy turn out to be true, then everything is very serious. He thinks that if their plan to capture Xiaonan doesn't work, they will just capture him themselves. A sharp sound distracts the man from his thoughts. He sees a huge rubber duck flying through the door, with several people lying on its back. On the duck are two unconscious guys who broke into Xiaonan's house earlier. Chifan sees this and screams loudly, asking why the boys are doing such childish things. Meanwhile, unnoticed by their eyes, Xiaonan picks up the control panel. The duck is on wheels, so at the first command of the owner, it begins to move towards Sifan and the man. There is a loud crash everywhere. Furniture is broken and people are hit by pieces of furniture. The beast-like man watches this from the side and does not understand what is happening. The duck breaks the table and a plate containing several steaks that had previously been served to the man is smashed. Standing at the very entrance to the building is Xiaonan, who asks Chifan if he was the one they were looking for. The blonde man walks towards him, holding the storage book, and says that they haven't cleared everything up yet since last time. Chifan looks at Xiaonan angrily and asks if he wants to die. However, he is stopped by a man's hand, which rests on his shoulder. The man seemed to be burning with rage and asked if the blonde was by Xiaonan. The man's eyes burn with anger and he asks how the boy dared to disturb his peace. Chifan takes out his sword and points it at Xiaonan, asking how dare he threaten them. Chifan orders his subordinates to bring him Xiaonan's weapon immediately. The blonde takes his star weapon out of the system and grins, saying that there are a lot of people. The guy takes his sword out of its sheath and says that it's enough for him to warm up. The beast-like man looks in surprise at the guy who pulled the sword out of thin air and realizes that he has exactly the ability he thought about earlier. Xiaonan, meanwhile, effortlessly breaks through the crowd, cutting their swords into small pieces. Chifan hopes to strike the blonde, but he manages to block his attack, cutting his sword into small pieces. Zifan freezes in surprise, but the next second she loses her balance and falls. The guy's subordinates think that Xiaonan killed their leader and run away from the blonde. The guy tells them that his blade doesn't kill people, but you can always become a villain if you're brave enough. From behind Xiaonan, she hears a man's voice saying that they have finally met. The blonde instantly identifies which direction the voice is coming from and turns towards it, swinging his sword. However, the sword is stopped by large clawed hands. The next second, the man squeezes the sword in his hand and it breaks. Xiaonan looks at this with fear and realizes that he is left without a weapon in Qifan's lair. The guy was also shocked by the fact that the man actually turned out to be a werewolf and now appeared before him in a different guise. At this time, Xiaonan stands in front of the man who came to him and says that the system's recommendations that he should run and not look back are not so easy to follow. For a while, the den becomes quiet. However, this does not last long, because the next second, Xiaonan, who was thrown back by the werewolf's blow, breaks through the wall of the building. The blonde managed to create a shield before receiving a blow from the man and now endures his blows. As soon as the werewolf struck a couple of blows with his claws, Xiaonan's shield began to fall apart. The man raises his hand to strike and says that the things the guy created are simple trinkets. The werewolf says that it is funny to watch, then punches Xiaonan, causing him to fly away. The guy lands in trash bags and, trying to resist the pain, begins to create a new weapon. Due to the dust rising into the air, the werewolf sees only a faint green glow and asks if the guy can handle one more round. Suddenly, an arrow flies towards him from Xiaonan's side, which he barely manages to dodge. The blonde created a crossbow from scrap materials that can use anything as a projectile. The werewolf looks at the guy who appeared from the cloud of dust and says that now it looks more interesting. The man says they are starting the second round and rushes towards the blonde, dodging arrows. Xiaonan understands that at this rate, the werewolf will quickly get to him. The guy jumps to the side and shoots a double flail crossbow. A rope with 2 stones at the ends is wrapped around the werewolf and twisted around him, tying him up. The man looks at Xiaonan and asks if he really thinks this can stop him. However, the werewolf is distracted, which the blonde takes advantage of and throws a blue cube in his direction, saying that he has a different plan. The man looks towards the fragment flying towards him, trying to understand what it is. But the next moment, the fragment expands and a large metal cage lands on the werewolf. The tied-up man is locked in a cage, and now Xiaonan can get closer to him. The blonde looks at the man for a while, then asks what he really is. The werewolf looks angrily at Xiaonan and says that he needs to ask himself this question. The man asks the blonde what he is. Xiaonan clutches his bruised ribs and says that it doesn't concern the werewolf. The man's muscles tense and tear the rope, after which he says that such strength as the blonde has is beyond the control of an ordinary person. The werewolf grabs the bars of the cage and bends them without any problem, getting out, thereby scaring Xiaonan. The man who turned into a monster hits the blonde man in the stomach with all his might. The force of the blow causes blood to flow from Xiaonan's mouth. The werewolf throws the guy aside, inflicting several wounds on him with his claws. Xiaonan lies on the ground and thinks that he was too careless and is now losing consciousness due to heavy blood loss. Tears start flowing from the guy's eyes. He can't do anything, not even move. The only thing Xiaonan can think about is Linke, and the system notifies that there is a danger that the owner will die soon. The werewolf, meanwhile, turns away from the motionless guy and talks to someone on the phone. He informs his superior that his mission is accomplished. The voice on the other end of the phone says that he only needs the core, to which the man says that he understands. The werewolf waits for the boss to hang up and only then hangs up. The man turns to Xiaonan, who is lying on the ground, and says that he has only one thing left to do. Extending the claws on his hands, he says that all that remains is for him to find his core, wherever it may be hidden. The werewolf points its claws towards Xiaonan, preparing to rip open his stomach. However, a guy suddenly grabs him by the claw, preventing him from striking. The werewolf looks in surprise at the guy, who, in his opinion, was no longer breathing. He asks Xiaonan why he is still alive and sees that the blonde man's eyes have changed. The werewolf is frightened by the external changes in the blonde, which is why he jumps away from him. The man, shocked, asks how this is possible and where the guy gets such strength from. Xiaonan looks at his wounds and says that his body is quite weak, so he needs to first fix it and only then activate the potential. The guy starts floating in the air, surrounded by flashes of pixels, and the system notifies that his body is overloaded and can no longer continue activating the potential. It was as if another person had entered Xiaonan, saying that the body was not capable of more, so he would not use his potential. The werewolf watches everything that is happening with anger. The man says that the guy is pretending to be a ghost, but since he is not dead, he will kill him again. The werewolf extends its claws and lunges towards Xiaonan, who is standing sideways to it. Before the man can get close to him, the blonde turns around and looks at him with diamond-shaped eyes. The werewolf, who was about to attack earlier, suddenly stops and looks at Xiaonan with fear. The man begins to tremble with fear because his inner instincts scream about danger. Now he feels like a small lion standing next to a huge dragon. Xiaonan lifts some pieces of rock and iron into the air and asks what the werewolf's name is. The man feels threatened, which causes him to back away, asking why the guy needs to know about this. Having created a sword from the trash, Xiaonan says that his weapon will not cut the nameless one into pieces. The werewolf starts laughing, calling the guy crazy, because a couple of minutes ago he was defeated by a man. The werewolf points his finger at the guy and says that his name is Black Lion and recommends that he remember his name before he dies. The man grins menacingly at Xiaonan and says he will tear him to pieces. The werewolf jumps up and strikes the blonde, but he easily dodges. Black Lion continues to strike, but Xiaonan parries them with his sword. Each time, the blows become stronger and stronger because the werewolf's anger grows. A few blows later, Xiaonan's sword shatters into pieces. The guy jumps to the side, dodging the claw's strikes. Xiaonan notices that his hand is shaking and says that this body is already at its limit, so he can only use 1/10 of his strength. The black lion is already approaching the guy, and in the blink of an eye, he creates several blades of bizarre shapes. He points them towards the werewolf, saying that he needs to finish as soon as possible. 4 blades slam into the black lion, piercing his flesh. Chains begin to emerge from the blades. Each of the chains reaches towards the ground, pinning and immobilizing the werewolf. When the man looks up, he sees Xiaonan raising a huge spear above him and preparing to strike. Lightning envelops the spear, which defeats the werewolf with 1 blow. The man's eyes roll back and he loses consciousness, with black liquid beginning to flow from his mouth. Multiple bolts of lightning envelop his body, and black flashes begin to burst out of his mouth as if a spirit were leaving him. As the dark power leaves the werewolf's body, he becomes more and more human-like. His body is enveloped in a smoke screen, hiding him from the eyes of others. When the smoke clears, the giant werewolf is replaced by a decrepit old man who says that this cannot be. The old man says that Xiaonan is able to take away his power, but he doesn't have time to finish because the guy hits him in the face with his boot. The blonde orders him to die and sees a blue light coming from the unconscious old man's body. The flame begins to slowly transform into an unusual shape. Xiaonan notices this and rushes to grab it. He catches the black lion spirit by the tail, which was trying to escape from him. Xiaonan orders the escaping spirit to leave him alone. The spirit obeys him and begins to transform into a round blue ball, calming down in the blonde's hands. Xiaonan immerses the spirit into the book, and it is described as a broken beast soul that can increase the star rating of a weapon. The blonde looks at the spirit in amazement, saying that they too can recover. A stream of pixels begins to emerge from Xiaonan's head. Soon, the spirit of Pandora, whom he had defeated, emerges from his body. The girl says that time is up and tells Xiaonan not to forget about their agreement. Pandora disappears into thin air, saying that she is very interested to know how the guy can repay her. Xiaonan let Pandora's spirit into his body when he was on the verge of despair and is now immensely grateful to her. Suddenly, the soul in his hand begins to burn with a crimson flame, attracting his attention. The beast spirit asks Xiaonan what kind of system it is that gives him strength. The blonde is frightened by the appearance of a strange spirit and throws it aside. The spirit complains that it is not a ball, but Xiaonan does not pay attention to this, saying that the strange thing can also talk. The blonde points his finger at him and says that since he was able to master the power of the lion, it means that he is also the owner of the system. Xiaonan takes courage and orders him to tell Qifan not to touch him again. The spirit begins to laugh at him and asks if he really cares about such a trifle. Xiaonan looks at him in surprise and asks what he means. The spirit calls the blonde a fool and says that he just wants to explain to him exactly how the system works. A system is a force that controls the world, and each system is separated from the outside world. The system itself has become a full-fledged world, and this world within the system is superior in power to the real world. The owner of the system is a god in this world. Xiaonan latches onto the words that there is more than one system and understands that they are not the only ones who have it. The blonde suggests that the spirit specifically summoned the lion, since the owners of the systems can absorb each other. The spirit laughs, saying that the guy is smarter than he seems at first glance. He calls it the law of the jungle, where the fittest survives. Such are the relations between the owners of the systems. The owner of the system advises Xiaonan to give up, because when the spirit achieves final victory, it will have a lot of fun with the blonde. The guy squeezes the spirit with both hands and says he agrees to try. After this, Xiaonan tears the spirit into two, ordering it to attack. The blonde warns him that he is not afraid of trouble. The torn-apart spirit begins to be absorbed by Xiaonan's system, and in the end, he says that in this case, the blonde will soon die. A new item, the pure soul of a beast, is displayed in the system storage book. Xiaonan realizes that the system both helps him and makes him a target for other owners, and there is no information about who they are. Suddenly, the guy shudders and breaks out in a cold sweat. Xiaonan looks at his shaking hands and realizes that his vision is starting to blur. At this time, the system owner who sent Black Lion to look for Xiaonan stood up from his seat. He laughs, licks his lips, and says that he likes impudent people like this guy. After laughing a little more, the guy snaps his fingers. As if on his silent command, the cages standing around him open. Each of the cages contains monsters, and the owner tells them to get ready for a treat. We return to Xiaonan, who suddenly opened his eyes, coming to his senses. He jumps up on the bed with a scream and starts looking around. The wind blows through the open window of the room and brings fallen autumn leaves into the room. The guy calms down and looks at the things around him in surprise. Xiaonan guesses that he is now in the hospital. The guy is about to get out of bed to find out who found him and brought him to the hospital. However, as soon as he pushed off the bed with his hand to stand up, he flew into the air a couple of meters. After that, he immediately fell back onto the bed, not understanding how this could have happened. At this moment, his attending physician and nurse enter the room and look at what is happening in surprise. They greet the guy who is trying to fix the broken furniture. The doctor decides to hold the conversation elsewhere and invites the guy to his office. After their conversation, Xiaonan learns that someone brought him to the hospital and helped pay for all the expenses. The doctor says that the guy's body condition is much better than other people's, so he can already be discharged. Xiaonan remembers that he broke a lot of things in the ward, but the doctor says that everything has already been paid for, so he doesn't have to worry. He is about to offer Xiaonan something if he feels guilty, but the guy jumps up and says goodbye. The blonde doesn't need to pack his things, so he immediately heads for the exit of the hospital. The only question that goes through his head is who saved him and paid all the expenses. The guy didn't expect that his powers would get out of control and harm him and the things around him. The guy activates his power and his body becomes covered in a faint glow. The next moment, he takes off at high speed and thinks it's really cool. In a short period of time, Xiaonan successfully reaches home. Linka meets him at the apartment and he asks her if something happened. The girl saw how fast the guy flew into the apartment, so the guy says that he still doesn't fully control his strength. All his conversations are interrupted by Linka, who cautiously calls him by name, forcing him to shut up. The girl looks at her hands folded in her lap and asks Xiaonan to never leave her again in the future. Her hands are shaking from an excess of emotions and she asks him not to leave her, even if the guy cannot tell her his secrets. Xiaonan sees that the girl is worried, so she walks up to her and covers her hand with hers. He looks into her eyes and swears that he will never leave her again. The guy also tells Linka that he wants to tell her something. Xiaonan finally decides to tell her about all the events that happened to him after she appeared. Linka listens attentively to his story, after which he asks if all this is dangerous. The guy deliberately concealed everything that directly concerns the system in his story, so he asks you to trust him. Suddenly, his body was filled with pain and weakness, just like the day he lost consciousness. Xiaonan is unable to stand on his feet, so he falls to his knees, which makes the girl scared. Linka slides out of the chair and crawls towards him, asking what's happening to him and says that the guy is bleeding. Before the girl can reach him, a hand appears out of thin air and grabs Xiaonan by the collar. A girl appears in the room and Linka asks who she is and where she's taking the blonde man. Pandora hadn't paid any attention to her before and grabbed Xiaonan by the collar and was about to leave. However, she was stopped by the girl's cries, which made her turn and look at her. Linka's face was covered in tears, and she looked at Pandora with hope. The warrior turned away and entered another space with Xiaonan, saying that he would be fine. Xiaonan comes to his senses inside the space and sees a doll with a huge hole in its body. The guy asks why the doll looks like him and asks if the winner's contract has anything to do with it. Pandora reminds that the guy himself made a contract with her, and this doll is his almost destroyed soul. Xiaonan is amazed that the girl says this so calmly and asks if she did this to him. Pandora says that his body was too weak for her potential, so she deliberately enhanced it. The girl also says that the guy has earned himself 3 more months of life, which she congratulates him on. Xiaonan shouts at her that they have an agreement that he will fulfill in a year, so he will not give her his system so easily. However, his hands begin to shake again and he says he is not sure he will live to see that day. Pandora says she doesn't understand why the guy is doing all this and asks if the girl he likes is to blame for this. Xiaonan interrupts her and says that it's not that he likes her. All this time, the guy lived for her, and as soon as he saw her, he was firm in his decision. He had long ago decided that he would protect her all his life. Xiaonan and Linke grew up together. Her parents died early in an accident. The guy doesn't want to leave her alone and wants her to always be happy and safe. Pandora interrupts his speech, saying that she doesn't understand people's feelings very well anyway. The girl tells Xiaonan that until she fully recovers her strength, she will not be able to fight in her fighting form. Pandora says that the guy's life will depend on her for the entire year. The girl directs her powers towards Xiaonan's soul, and the hole on it begins to slowly heal, leaving a cross-shaped scar in its place. Pandora reveals that in addition to absorbing each other in a battle between masters, the opponent's strength is also a support for restoring one's own soul. Xiaonan suggests that in order to start a fight, one must take the initiative. The guy thinks that his student life will clearly be eventful. It was school time, and Xiaonan and Linke went to class. and the boy tells the girl that the weather is nice today. The blonde guy invites the girl to go for a walk to the playground, and she agrees. Xiaonan notices a pop-up window in the system, in which he sees that he has 3 months, 14 days, 14 hours, 24 minutes, 34 seconds left to live. Linka calls the guy and asks if he is going to take the entrance exams. The guy answers in the affirmative and says that he will prepare well because there are still 3 months left before them. Xiaonan decides to ask the girl if she is thinking about entering Huada University. The girl does not answer this question and says that she knows that the guy is hiding something from her. She understands that the guy doesn't tell her anything because he doesn't want her to worry. Linka says that despite this, she will always support him. Xiaonan looks back at the girl with gratitude and does not notice the threat lurking among the trees. The hooded man has been watching them for some time now and now takes out his blade. Xiaonan senses movement behind him and grabs Linka in his arms, dodging a blow that cuts the wheelchair into pieces. The guy lands at a distance from the attacker. Xiaonan begins to examine Linka and asks if she is hurt, and the girl says that she is fine. The guy looks towards the unknown person and sees that he is already running towards them. Xiaonan leaves the girl aside and runs in the other direction, trying to lead the attacker away from the girl. However, the same person blocks his path. Taking advantage of Xiaonan's confusion, the unknown person stabs the guy in the stomach with a dagger. A white tiger's face appears from under the cloak, and it looks quite surprised. Meanwhile, Xiaonan had already taken out his new weapon from the storage book, a glove that now emits lightning. An explosion erupts from the glove, but does not hit the beast, as it manages to jump to the side. The unknown creature lands, dodging the asphalt shards flying towards it. Tiger throws off his cloak and says that the guy thinks too much of himself if he thinks he can defeat Black Lion's men. Xiaonan guesses that he is from that very gang and says that he thought he would meet their master in person. Tiger says that Mr. Li is many times stronger than the guy, so he doesn't want to waste his time on him. Suddenly, the tiger shouts at the cat to stop fidgeting and hurry up. Xiaonan turns back when he hears Linka's screams. Next to the girl stands a girl with cat ears and a tail. The cat girl notices that she has been noticed, but does not stop strangling Linka. Suddenly, the girl starts asking for forgiveness and stops looking at her. Tiger says the cat did a good job and orders Xiaonan to surrender if he wants his girlfriend to live. The blonde has no choice but to give up, so he removes the glove from his hand. As soon as he does so, the tiger rushes towards him, saying that it is time for Xiaonan to die. The guy folds his hands in a protective gesture, although he understands that this will not help him. At this moment, he seems to plunge into another dimension in which time stops. However, before he can reach the guy, he is knocked down halfway by an unknown guy. Without waiting for the tiger to strike, Xiaonan opens his eyes and begins to look around. His gaze falls on something he didn't expect to see. He sees a guy with long dark hair checking his watch and saying it took 5 seconds longer. The guy says that he has been too relaxed lately, which is why he stayed late. What surprised Xiaonan most was that the tiger that had tried to attack him a second earlier was now lying unconscious. The blue-eyed guy turns to the blonde and greets him, saying that this is their second meeting. The boys stand opposite each other, but say nothing else. Xiaonan immediately remembers Linka and calls her, and the girl replies that she is fine. The girl looks at the cat and says that it suddenly fell unconscious. Xiaonan turns to the dark-haired boy and asks what he did. Flashes of blue lightning begin to appear behind the dark-haired boy, and the tiger begins to scream. The tiger has transformed into a terrible monster with many spikes, and now asks how the guy dared to hit him. The dark-haired guy calmly and with a smile on his face tells Xiaonan that he will deal with the tiger first. The transformed tiger rushes towards the calmly standing guy. The dark-haired man takes several cards out of the inside pocket of his jacket. He throws them towards the tiger and says they will end beautifully. The cards turn into sharp icicles on the fly and stick into the tiger's body. Once the fragments reach their target, they begin to grow, covering the beast's body with icy growths. A few moments later, a large block of ice appears in place of the tiger, with ice peaks sticking out in different directions. However, the dark-haired guy doesn't stop there and deals a crushing blow to the boulder. The ice floe breaks into many small pieces. The guy lands near Xiaonan and he asks if the dark-haired guy really killed the tiger. The guy extracts a soul from the fragments and says that the ability of the animal world is to instill a soul into a human body. He says that these creatures are 2-star creations made in the beast world and that they drop rare materials. The guy takes a rare item out of the tiger and hands it to Xiaonan in honor of their acquaintance. The blonde continues to look at the guy with suspicion and asks who he is. The guy says his name is Wu Xin, and he also has his own system, and Xiaonan shouldn't worry because if he wanted to harm him, he wouldn't have sent him to the hospital. The blonde is surprised by what the guy did for him, and Shin remembers that it cost more than 30,000. Xiaonan feels uncomfortable that the guy spent so much money on him, so he gratefully accepts the rare item. It turns out to be a 2-star tendon of a young tiger, which, after being eaten, is capable of prolonging life for a long time. After this, Xiaonan starts to create a wheelchair because the previous one was destroyed by a tiger. The blonde man carefully sits Linka down and asks what they should do with the cat girl. Shin says that they have nothing to worry about because he will send her back to the Beast Lord. An ice stork appears from the card thrown by Blue, grabs the screaming cat by the hood and flies away. Xiaonan and Linke watch the silhouettes recede and hear the girl screaming that she will be eaten. After waiting for the screams to die down, the blonde turns to Shin and asks what kind of abilities he has. The brunette puts his finger to his lips and says that people like them shouldn't share secrets with each other. Shin approaches the boy and girl and says that they don't have much time left, so they should leave. Xiaonan asks where they are going, and the brunette replies that they are going to a place where they can talk, and Miss Lu too. Suddenly, the entire company moves to a certain room, but Xiaonan and Linke were not prepared for this. Shin invites them to settle in with a smile, saying that this is his base, but the blonde does not hear him because he is not feeling well. The brunette remembers that the first space travel can make you feel a little nauseous, so he hands them a glass of water. A little time passes during which Linka and Xiaonan come to their senses. Shin asks if they need anything else, and the girl replies that they are fine. The brunette places the glasses on the counter and says that in that case they should get down to business. Shin says that Xiaonan must fulfill his 3 demands or he will extract the martial world core from his body. The blonde freezes in shock because Shin no longer looks as friendly as before. Linka doesn't fully understand what this is all about, but he knows that it definitely carries some risks. She asks if Xiaonan will be harmed in this, and Shin replies that there is a 67.5% chance that he won't. Linka asks why the brunette wants to help them, and why Xiaonan in particular. Shin says he doesn't know the answer himself, but Xiaonan should have realized that the system gives them the main task. The brunette takes the cards out of his pocket and they start to float in the air around the guy and the girl. Shin says that each owner of the system has his own main tasks, and his task is to guide, but not to kill. So the brunette must help Xiaonan truly master his skills. The blonde seemed to sense a threat coming from the guy, so he began to materialize a weapon. Xiaonan slings the huge sword over his shoulder and asks why Shin thinks they need his help. However, before he can take a single step, he freezes in place. Turning his head slightly, Xiaonan noticed an ice blade that was almost touching his neck. Shin was at his side in an instant and already had a dagger to his neck and said that it would be reckless of him to refuse. Having shown what he is capable of, the brunette runs away with the blade and tells Xiaonan to listen to him carefully. He points to the flying cards and says that this is the kingdom key to activate one of the worlds. Only a man who has created his own key can take possession of the kingdom. The martial world is not a place where you can create whatever you want. And as for the secret, Xiaonan will have to find out for himself. After finishing his speech, Shin puts the cards back in his pocket and Xiaonan puts away his sword. The blonde doesn't know if he can trust this guy or not, but decides to just listen to him as long as Linka is around. After waiting a minute, Shin adjusts his glasses and says that they should move on to the next 2 demands. The brunette asks Xiaonan to listen to him carefully. The guy says that the second requirement can be very difficult for the blonde. Xiaonan is preparing to hear something scary or difficult. Shin tells him that he should go home, review everything thoroughly, and prepare for the upcoming exam. Xiaonan and Linke look at him with great surprise because they didn't expect such a demand. Shin says that the boys are still students, so they should study properly. Xiaonan says that they are deciding a matter of life and death here, and the brunette starts talking some nonsense. Shin says he will take care of their safety until the guy gets the key. Xiaonan looks at the brunette and doesn't know what to answer him. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to Linka, who pulls him by the edge of his jacket. The girl says that they have already faced difficulties in their lives, but the guy always did everything in his power. She says that Xiaonan is not the type of person to let go. Linka reminds him that his life does not end with this system. Xiaonan thinks about her words and realizes that he really has been fixated on the system lately. The guy looks at the countdown chart again and says he doesn't have much time left. After his words, Shin remembers that the guy had to sign a contract with a certain creature. Xiaonan is surprised by the fact that the brunette knows about this. Shin says the boys were initially skeptical, but since it was their first meeting, they had to show respect for each other. After his words, the guys shake hands in a conciliatory gesture. Xiaonan is transported to his space and is very surprised that Shin came here after him. Brunette says that the power of what was left by previous generations cannot be limited by the current gods of war. Pandora looks at him and says that there has been unauthorized entry. The girl begins to create a weapon, and the next second it appears in her hand. Pandora charges at Shin with a battle cry. The brunette says that such murderous attitudes towards those she meets for the first time can negatively affect the user. Pandora strikes, but Shin deftly dodges. Catching the moment when the girl froze for a second, the brunette puts his finger to her forehead. He says the word change, after which the girl's forehead begins to glow. At the point where the fingers touched, a mark in the form of an hourglass, which was on Shin's cards, appeared on Pandora's forehead. The girl starts rubbing her forehead and jumps away from the brunette. Pandora begins to dissolve into pixels and asks if it was worth it. Shin also begins to dissolve and replies that what is worthwhile is not as simple as it may seem. Xiaonan asks the brunette what's going on, but he tells him to just wait. A cube appears in front of the blonde, from which a voice comes, promising to do something next time. Xiaonan emerges from his space and asks Shin what just happened. The brunette approaches the table and leans on it with a shaking hand. Shin puts a handkerchief to his mouth and says that Pandora cannot harm him now. Xiaonan checks the system and notices that the timer has stopped, then tells Shin that he is amazing. The brunette says that nothing else is stopping the guy from preparing for the exam, but he will voice the last requirement next time. Linka happily says that it's time for them to go, and Xiaonan thanks Shin for his help. The guy directs his power at them and sends them back to the real world, instructing them to prepare well for the exam. When the room is empty, Shin turns towards the table. He takes off his monocle and places it next to a photograph of a couple in love. The guy starts to lose his magical haze and says that they probably didn't guess anything. Instead of the usual young guy, there is now a gray-haired man standing and looking at the photo, saying that Xiaonan's eye is not that sharp yet. Shin looks at the picture of the couple in love and tells them not to worry because he will take care of the guy. Suddenly, the man's body is pierced by pain, which makes him flinch. He puts a handkerchief to his mouth and begins to cough, leaning against the counter behind him. Pulling the handkerchief away from his mouth, the man notices blood on the perfectly white fabric. Shin says that Bai Xiaonan is the 9th god of war, who is now his last hope. Meanwhile, Xiaonan and Linka head home on the rocket that the boy had created earlier. 7 days had passed since the meeting with Shin. As he said, a week passed without any incidents. On the floor, we see beads of sweat and hear the countdown 286, 287, 288. The count is kept by Xiaonan, who is doing a specific exercise. The guy does one-arm push-ups and thinks that he can spend all his free time exploring his new body. Having finished the exercise, the blonde gets up from the floor and picks up a towel. The guy is thinking about how to create his own key, and at the same time wipes the sweat from his face. Xiaonan had been trying to create items all week, but he still hadn't come up with anything useful. After training, the guy decides to take a shower. After all the bath procedures, he changes clothes and dries his hair. Having got ready, he runs out of the apartment because it is time for him to go to class. After some time, he picks up Linka, and now they are going to classes, and the girl expresses her concerns about the trial exam. The guy looks at her and tells her not to worry because she's doing well in school. Linka looks back at him and says that she is worried not about herself, but about him. Xiaonan realizes that he has been focusing mainly on the system lately and has somewhat forgotten about his studies. While they were talking, a guy ran up to them from the side, greeted Xiaonan, and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The gray-haired boy asks if Linka and Xiaonan still live together, and the blonde boy answers yes. The guy smiles at his answer and says that in the future they will have no other choice but to get married. His words make Linka and Xiaonan blush. We learn that the guy's name is Ansui and that an angry Xiaonan is now trying to strangle him. The gray-haired man swears that he will not say that again, and the blonde man lets him go. Ansui says they have a new teacher, but Xiaonan doesn't understand why they would change teachers right before the exams. A white cat with a red scarf around its neck watches their conversation from the side. Her keen gaze is directed specifically at Xiaonan. As if he felt someone's gaze on him, the guy turns around and looks towards the roof. However, he sees nothing there and decides that he just imagined it. Ansui notices his friend's behavior and turns around too, asking what's going on. Xiaonan says that he just imagined it, after which the friends move on, continuing their conversation. In the classroom, the children are met by their classmates and welcomed to the 3rd grade. They ask Xiaonan when he is going to treat them to wedding wine. Ansui is infected with their mood and asks the blonde to be sure to treat them after the exam. Linka and Xiaonan angrily yell at him, ordering him to shut up. Within moments, the room is filled with their laughter and conversation. They don't notice a man enter the classroom with a basketball and throw it towards Xiaonan. Right in front of the blonde's nose, the ball is stopped by someone's hand. Ansuya. The guy who threw the ball tells them that if they want to laugh and make noise, they should go back to their last class. Ansui squeezes the ball furiously and tells a guy named Xiaohei that classes haven't started yet and he might have hit someone. Xiaohei says that accidents happen and they can complain to the principal about him if they want. Ansui replies that the guy only takes advantage of his position and even gets into a sports school at the director's expense. The friend is interrupted by Xiaonan, who steps forward and asks if Xiaohei would like to play with him. The blonde says that if the guy wins, he will never see him again. Xiaohei smirks at his proposal, but agrees. A group of guys approaches him, after which he advises Xiaonan to start assembling a team. Xiaohei agrees to play with him and promises that if he loses, he too will not appear before Xiaonan again. Ansui says that he will go and assemble a team right now, but the blonde stops him. Xiaonan starts spinning the ball on his finger and says he can handle them alone. After some time, the teams meet on the basketball court. Xiaonan's friends are in the stands, half of them happily supporting him, while the other half are watching what is happening in surprise. The blonde single-handedly bypasses the players from the opposing team, and they don't have time to keep up with him. Xiaohe looks at the guy angrily, but doesn't have time to react to his attacks. Xiaonan throws the ball into the net without much effort. The scoreboard shows the score 2-0. When the opponent surrounds Xiaonan, he jumps up with the ball, causing Xiaohei to be both angry and surprised at the same time. After a short period of time, the score becomes 22-0. The game continues and the opposing team tries to block Xiaonan. However, the guy doesn't get confused and throws the ball from the middle of the court, hitting the net. When the score becomes 88-0, the referee declares the game over and Xiaonan has won. The guy happily leaves the court and sees Xiaohei, who is sitting on the floor and saying that he is leaving basketball. Ansui asks when Xiaonan became so good, and Linka replies that he has been training a lot lately. A minute later, Xiaonan approaches the friends and a conversation begins between them. The blonde is being watched from the side, but he doesn't notice it. A red-haired girl watches him and sighs as she looks at him. It's time for lessons, and when the teenagers quiet down, the teacher enters the room. Xiaonan seemed to ignore him, but when the teacher began to introduce himself, he turned his head in his direction. The teacher took a piece of chalk and wrote his name on the board. Wu Chao. The man turns to face the class, saying that from this day on he will be their new teacher. Xiaonan looks at him in shock, not understanding what Mr. Wu is doing here. The teacher says that he is a professor at Huada and that the principal invited him to reduce their stress from studying. Ansui sees Xiaonan's reaction and asks if he has seen this man before, but the blonde replies that he doesn't remember. A friend is thinking that the blonde has been acting very strange lately. Xiaonan looks at his friend with surprise and anxiety, not knowing how to explain his behavior. Suddenly, Ansui suggests that the ancestral spirit attached itself to the blonde and began to teach him how to cultivate immortality. Or he might have received some kind of system. Xiaonan decides to turn everything into a joke and says that the guy has too much imagination and recommends that he write a book or a TV series. While the boys are laughing, they don't notice what's going on around them. But a piece of chalk that flies into the blonde's head brings them to their senses. The teacher looks at Xiaonan with a smile and asks him to behave more politely during the lesson. Otherwise, he threatens that next time it will be anything but petty. Written in small print on the chalk is a message from the teacher telling them to meet at Orange Peak after class. All the classes passed in such anticipation, and finally the last bell for the day rang. The corridors immediately filled with bustling and laughing students. While sitting in her classroom, Linka noticed Xiaonan walking past the classroom, accompanied by Mr. Wu. The girl tries to understand what Teacher Wu is doing with the blonde man and assumes that this is the new teacher that Ansui is talking about. The next moment, Linka turns away from the window leading to the corridor and says that it shouldn't worry her. Outside the window, a white cat is watching the girl on a tree, and the girl notices it out of the corner of her eye. However, as soon as Linka turned her head, the cat disappeared from her field of vision and hid behind a tree trunk. Meanwhile, Teacher Wu and Xiaonan went to the roof of the building to talk. The blonde looks at the teacher defiantly and asks why he came to their school, and more importantly, when he managed to become a professor. The brunette shows his ID and says that he didn't lie and that this is indeed the truth. Teacher Wu says that he came because he wanted to see his progress, because the boy recently studied the world key but made a lot of mistakes. Xiaonan begins to materialize the weapon and assumes that the teacher will not tell him anything about the world key anyway. However, with the help of the man's hints, the blonde still managed to create a changeable sword. Despite all his efforts, The boy was able to create a sword that changes its shape, but he was unable to upgrade it to the level of 2 stars. The sword in the boy's hands takes on different shapes, and Xiaonan says that he decided not to use tiger tendons this time. The teacher says that the key to creating 2 stars will be the creation of a world key, because without it, the guy is not able to fight with other masters. The man thinks that this is the first time he has seen a 1.5-star weapon, so he thinks that Xiaonan is a genius in his own way. Having demonstrated the sword's capabilities, the blonde puts it away and says that he still can't understand anything. The teacher smiles and looks at the thoughtful boy. Mr. Yu raises his finger and suggests that the guy think about why he needs this key at all. Xiaonan slaps his fist against his palm and suggests that the key is needed to open the lock. Suddenly, a silhouette appears behind the young man, causing the teacher to flinch. An unknown person, who vaguely resembles a rat and has a long tail, jumps down from the top of the roof and directs a stream of fire at Xiaonan and the teacher. In flight, it flips over and lands on its feet away from its victims. Master Wu created a wall of ice to protect them and asked if Zichen really wanted to break the peace treaty between the masters. The Ratman replies that his master does not want to break the peace treaty, but he would like to see the new world master. While Xiaonan was distracted, a girl snuck up behind him and put her hands on him, saying that it was not against the rules. The girl with the foxtail snuggled up to the blonde and said that the guy was pretty cute and to her taste. The girl hugged Xiaonan and told him that he had better not move, because she might accidentally break his neck. Suddenly her eyes widen as she felt something strange. Without her noticing, Xiaonan materialized an explosive glove and pressed it against the fox's stomach, forcing her to step aside. The guy was angry at the way the girl was clinging to him, so he told her to disappear. The next moment, he activated the glove and the fox disappeared into thin air. The Ratman saw everything, but he couldn't do anything except start scolding Xiaonan. Teacher Wu stood to the side and did not interfere with the situation, watching how the blonde would solve the problem. The man pointed ice shards at the Ratman and said that they had crossed the line and ordered them to leave. Teacher Wu tells him to return to the master and say that it is none of his business what the brunette is doing, and that the Soldier King himself will come to him when he grows up. The Ratman dodges the shards and jumps off the roof, saying that he will definitely pass on his words. Ansui watched all this from the side and decided that Xiaonan was acting strangely and followed him. Teacher Wu watches the Ratman walk away and hears Xiaonan suggesting they take a break. The man thinks that he still feels very strange after this meeting. A pink mist, similar to the one that formed into the fox girl's tail, slowly stretches into one of the classrooms where the red-haired girl sits. Her eyes glow pink, like the girl on the roof of the building. The girl sits right behind Linka and, grinning evilly, thinks that they need to have some fun. For the rest of the day, the red-haired girl stayed close to Xiaonan, as if she had just happened to be nearby. The guy was talking with his friends and didn't notice the girl, which upset her a lot. Zei herself didn't understand why she started paying attention to Xiaonan. It was time for physical education, and the teacher said that there would be no running today and gave the class time to break into pairs. The red-haired girl began to look around in search of a free man. Her attention was drawn to a girl with a short haircut to whom she reached out, intending to offer to become a partner. But before she could touch the girl, someone grabbed her hand. One of her classmates pushed away the red-haired girl's hand. Zei cringed, pressing her sore arm to her chest, and looked at the girl named Xiaoman with a questioning look. A classmate told her to think first and then do something. Xiaoman took the short-haired classmate by the arm and led her away, saying that Ning's father had become a criminal, so she shouldn't interact with her anymore. Zei heard her words and screamed that her father had done nothing and had been falsely accused. But her screams did not reach her classmates, and they only talked about how the girl dared to come to school. Behind her back, her classmates called her the daughter of a criminal and asked how she could study in the same school with them. Zei could only stand there and cry under the onslaught of whispers, because even if she screamed, no one would hear her. The teacher asks if the teams are ready, and someone asks if 3 of them can participate. They justify this by saying that they get along well with each other, but in reality, they just don't want to be on the same team as Jie. The teacher does not notice the girl sitting on the other side of the crowd and offers to begin, but he is interrupted by a student. Xiaonan walks up to the class and says there is another team moving closer to Zei. The girl still cries and tells Xiaonan to forget about her and not pay attention to her. However, the blonde replies that as long as she is not guilty of anything, no one has the right to judge her. He tells her to get up, be brave, and follow the path she has chosen for herself, and not live in a world of gossip and rumors. The girl looks at Xiaonan in shock, not understanding why he is being kind to her. She thinks that it started the moment she laid eyes on him. Despite his kind-heartedness, he still didn't pay attention to her, especially when Linka was nearby. The girl believes that it is her own fault, because it was she who did not tell him about her feelings, which is why they grew apart in high school. Zayi's thoughts seem to be carried away to another space, where the silhouette of a fox touched her. Lisa says that the student thinks in an interesting way, as if she herself had become younger. Zayi opens her eyes and hears the fox telling her that she will help her kill Linka and then Xiaonan will become her complete property. Having come to her senses, the schoolgirl pushes the spirit away from herself and asks who she is. The fox stretches her elongated fingers towards Zayi and says that she will take her body and do something that the girl has never dared to do. The girl's body seems to be entangled with many tentacles, preventing her from moving independently. From that moment on, her body is completely controlled by the fox that has taken over her body. Having gained control, the fox walks up to Linka and places his hand on her shoulder. She looks friendly and asks the girl what she's doing. Linka looks out the window and says that he sees a frightened cat sitting on a tree outside the window. She's scared because there is a big black dog sitting under the tree and barking menacingly. The fox says that the cat is in danger and invites Linka to go down and help him. Linka says that she can't do anything anyway and the lesson will start soon, but the fox persuades her to go with her. The girl looks out the window and sees a cat shaking with fear and accepts her classmate's offer. Zayi helps Linka push the stroller, and soon they find themselves under the very tree where the cat is sitting. Unbeknownst to the girl, the fox uses its abilities on the dog. The dog feels that he has been taken over and turns towards the new arrivals. The next moment, as if led by an invisible force, the dog rushes towards Linka, who is sitting in the chair. The girl is frightened and tries to cover herself with her hands, telling Zayi that the dog is rushing straight towards them. But the dog doesn't have time to harm them, because Ansui runs out from the side and kicks the dog to the side. The fox looks angrily at the man who thwarted her plans. Linka is still scared and asks Ansuya how he ended up here. The guy says that he wanted to talk to her, and her classmate said that the girl went outside. Zayi begins to thank Ansuya for his help, but he does not respond to her, suggesting that Linka talk in private. The guy lowers his eyes and says that the conversation will be about Xiaonan. Linka is surprised, but cannot find a reason to refuse, so she agrees. Ansui takes control of the stroller from Zayi and they move away from the girl. Lisa scolds the guy who suddenly appeared. She thought that having sensed danger, Xiaonan would come in person. Suddenly her thoughts are interrupted by a voice asking how the fox is doing. In the blink of an eye, darkness opens up before the girl, in which two huge yellow eyes are burning. The girl promises that soon she will be able to stop the Soldier King from creating the world key. The master became angry and said that the girl must do it now because they needed to absorb Xiaonan's world as soon as possible. The owner threatens her that if she fails, she will face inevitable consequences, which frightens the girl even more. The master hopes that the fox has understood him and leaves. The girl starts to get angry and turns towards the departed Linke and Ansuya. Her eyes begin to glow, her claws lengthen, and a pink tail of smoke appears behind her back. We flash back a few hours to when Xiaonan and Mr. Wu were talking on the school rooftop after the attack. Master Wu says that Li Zhicheng is the best master in the world and he can't wait to meet him. Xiaonan says that Mr. Wu can call him by his first name, which causes the man to look at him. The teacher hopes that Xiaonan can withstand Li Zhichen's pressure and pass the college entrance exam. The blonde sighs, saying that no one can guarantee that no one will bother him again. Xiaonan asks how many systems there are in total, and the teacher says that he knows 3 more systems: the animal world, the art world, and the life world. Mr. Wu reassures the blonde man, saying that only Zhichen has such a personality, and the other masters speak very well. Xiaonan asks if they want to peacefully coexist with other world masters. The teacher says that they recently made this decision, so a master who has less than 2 stars will be free to develop. Zhichen was the first to expose Xiaonan and wanted to absorb him before others knew about him. The blonde is frightened by his words, but he asks what Mr. Wu himself, who is also one of the masters of the world, thinks. Xiaonan asks the teacher if he is really here to help him become a master. Mr. Wu turns around and walks off the roof, saying he can't answer that question right now. However, he asks you to believe that his ultimate goal is to make sure that the boy can survive until the end of this world battle of masters. Xiaonan was very puzzled by his words, but looking back, he realized that the teacher had never harmed him. Despite his reticence on some issues, Xiaonan says she trusts him. Xiaonan begins to dive into his inner space and sees a strange picture. Pandora is no longer dressed in her battle uniform, but has changed into her home clothes. She sits on the couch and watches TV, laughs loudly, and eats chips. In another fit of laughter, she throws her head back and notices Xiaonan standing next to her. The guy looks at her with a smile and says that they haven't seen each other for a long time. The girl starts to get angry and rushes at Xiaonan, preparing to strike. However, her fist crashes into the transparent shield that stands around her space. The girl starts knocking on him, asking Xiaonan to let her out, but the guy says that he doesn't know how to do it. Pandora says that because of the contract, the boy cannot take the power of other masters of the world to compensate for the power he spent. Xiaonan says that he did not come for this reason and asks the girl how to make a world key, hoping for her help. The girl says that the guy is funny because her goal is to kill him and he thinks that she will help him. Xiaonan says that his main goal is to make Linkage able to walk again, and after that, he will give her his position. Pandora froze in place because she didn't think the guy was serious then. The girl ponders his words and quietly asks if she can stay by his side. Xiaonan didn't hear and decided to ask again, but Pandora didn't repeat it. The girl says that she will not help him, because in the heart of every master there is a desire, an indomitable aspiration. Pandora points her finger at him and says that Xiaonan is no exception to the rule. She says that the world is a collection of desires, and the so-called worlds exist to achieve their desires. Xiaonan asks what these wishes are, but notices how colored water begins to envelop him. Pandora says the master of the world will be consumed by desire and power, and as their power becomes stronger, so will their desires become stronger. Xiaonan is overwhelmed by water, like tidal waves of the sea, and is pulled to the bottom. His own voice reaches his ears, but as if he were younger. He sees the well and himself holding Linka in his arms, wishing he was strong enough to protect her. The boy screams like a man possessed that he wants to become stronger. Xiaonan looks at the memories with horror, which he dreams of erasing from his memory forever. The memory turns into a terrible dream where the boy notices Seonan and grabs his leg, saying that he wants power. Pandora seems to be watching everything that is happening from above, and sees how her own nightmares are taking over the blonde's consciousness. She asks how a person can restrain himself when he has the power to fulfill all his desires. Xiaonan grabs one of the nightmares by the hand and bites it, after which the silhouette begins to dissolve, turning into fog. With one breath, the blonde absorbs all the nightmares that previously grabbed hold of him and wouldn't let go. Pandora looks at what is happening in shock, because she did not expect that the guy would be able to get out on his own. Xiaonan says that if this is his desire, it can't just swallow him up. Even if other desires have this ability, he must absorb them before they absorb him. A silhouette from her memories appears before the girl, telling her that he would consume desire before it consumed him. Pandora looks ahead in surprise, as if she saw a loved one who has been gone for a long time. The girl grabs her head and says that all this irritates her, because she should not be in first place, because she will not be able to educate the future generation. Xiaonan looks at her and says that if she doesn't want to say it, then she should just forget about it. Before the guy can finish speaking, he hears the sound of glass breaking and is pierced by pain. The girl, in an attempt to silence Xiaonan, materialized a spear and pierced the shield, hitting the blonde's stomach with the tip. At the same second, the shield flies apart, and the spear begins to glow from the lightning enveloping it. Lightning slowly but surely passes into Xiaonan's body, and he begins to remember when he felt this before. Pandora looks at him with a smirk and asks if he minds if she borrows his body and goes for a walk. Sometime later, Ansui takes Linka aside to talk about Xiaonan. Leaving the girl alone, the guy peeks out from a secluded place and looks around to make sure they are not being followed. After this, Ansui sits down in front of the girl and asks if it is true that she grew up with Xiaonan, and the girl answers in the affirmative. Leaning closer to Linka, the boy asks if the blonde is really human. The girl looks at him with a strange expression on her face and asks if the guy has been under too much pressure from studying lately. Ansui tries to justify himself by saying that he just saw something incredible, which is why he asked. Linka hangs his head and says he doesn't know how to say it. She asks if Ansui Xiaonan trusts him since they are best friends and recommends that they talk to him in person. The guy feels as if he has been shamed for trying to find out his friend's secrets through another person. They are distracted by Zei, who said that Linka is the kind of person who communicates with Xiaonan every day. The fox accuses the girl of currently flirting with another man. Ansui says that Linka is quite attractive and asks who he is talking to now. Zei's body, engulfed in a fox aura, said that Ansui was simply Xiaonan's assistant. The fox's aura wraps around the boy and girl, lifting them into the air, and the fox asks if Ansui is jealous, looking at Xiaonan's outstanding appearance. She says that the blonde has gained powers that ordinary people cannot even imagine. Lisa turns Ansuya against Xiaonan, saying that although he was his best friend, the blonde decided to keep silent about the power he had received. Lisa grabs the guy's face and says that Xiaonan didn't tell him anything because he doesn't consider him his friend. When doubt creeps into Ansuya's heart, the fox begins to creep into his body. The guy becomes possessed and begins to scream, either from pain or from the anger filling his heart. The fox spirit watches this from the side and tells him to become more and more angry and envious. Ansui can't escape the fox's thick aura and it begins to engulf him. Linka wants to get to him and help, but the abyss draws her in too. It turns out that all this time, Linka and Ansui stood motionless, and the fight was in their minds, poisoned by the fox. In the real world, the guy stands and trembles with anger, and his eyes have acquired a pink tint like the fox's tail. Linka is also shaking with feelings of indignation. Her eyes are also pink. The fox wants them to die in the fantasy world, and then Xiaonan will become a master with no one to follow, and then the master world will abandon him. She is interrupted by a voice that says that it was not in vain that he went out for a walk, because a lot of interesting things are happening here. The fox had already heard this voice, so she turned around abruptly. Right behind her stands Xiaonan, who asks the girl what she did with the boy and the girl. The girl didn't expect him to be so close, so she jumps back. Zei asks if Xiaonan remembers her, and the fox spirit thinks that she was able to save her strength since he came to her himself. Xiaonan says he remembers Zei well because they sat at the same desk in elementary school. The boy looks at his friends and sees Linka, and the fox understands that it will be difficult for her if she is exposed right now. The girl decides to act preemptively in order to hide the truth with her behavior. She suddenly walks up to Xiaonan and throws herself into his arms. The girl begins to confess her feelings, saying that since she was 6 years old, she had been very worried about him, but the guy did not pay attention to her. She asks if Xiaonan knows how much she loves him, and the fox thinks that with such close contact, the guy will not be able to detect the illusion. However, as soon as she looked up and into the guy's eyes, she began to shake. Xiaonan's body now contains Pandora, who demands that Zei show him her true body. Pandora's hypnotic gaze fills Zei's entire mind. They are transported into space, and the fox is surprised that her power has dissipated. The spirit looks around and sees the silhouette of Zei, who has also been transported into this space. She lunges at the girl, saying that she doesn't want to go back to her master anymore and doesn't want to be a beast anymore. The girl tries to defend herself and asks for help, after which the fox's blow is reflected by a yellow glow. Without waiting for the blow, Zei decides to see who saved her. Xiaonan appears in front of her with a sword in his hands and asks if the girl is okay. Lisa says that even Lord Jichen can't send her back to space, but Xiaonan did it without any difficulty. The girl transforms into a huge fox with many eyes and says that it is impossible to kill her in this space. Xiaonan remains calm and hands Zei the sword, causing the girl to cry out in surprise. The guy says that in this world, only she can save herself, so she needs to hold the sword tighter. The girl looks at Xiaonan and decides to follow his advice. The guy helps her hold the sword and says that this is a rare opportunity so she can say anything. The fox lunges at the girl, ordering Xiaonan to hand over the girl's body and disappear forever. The guy gives the signal and Zei braces herself, deciding that now she must stand up for herself. The girl swings her sword and wishes them luck on their college entrance exams. With one swing of her sword, the girl cuts the fox into pieces. Dissolving into thin air, the fox does not regret what happened and says that she is finally free. The fox's huge body dissolves into space and a weak ray of light falls on Zei's hand. The next second, the beam goes out and a small sleeping fox the size of a palm appears on the palm. The fog brought by the fox begins to dissolve, and the boy and girl find themselves back in the alley next to the school. Xiaonan holds Zei and says that he will always remember her, but she should forget it, because it is just a dream. The girl opens her eyes and asks again if it was all just a dream. But she was so tired from everything that had happened that without waiting for an answer, she fell asleep in Xiaonan's arms. After everything that happened, the school children headed to the infirmary. They carried Zei there and went out into the corridor, where Xiaonan told them that they had suffered from a gas leak. Ansui was surprised, but the blonde explained that the pipes in that alley were a bit old. Ansui said that he had a severe headache and felt as if he was having a nightmare. Linka says that thanks to Xiaonan, who found them in time, Zei was not seriously injured and will recover soon. Ansui ran away, saying at the end that when the classmate woke up, she would question Xiaonan. The boy and girl watch their friend, but suddenly Linka says that Xiaonan is not who he claims to be. The blonde turns to his friend and asks what this means. Linka says she has felt this for a long time and asks what he did to Xiaonan. The guy's eyes become like Pandora's, and the warrior says that the girl has a sharp gaze. Pandora says that there is still half of Xiaonan's soul left in this body and she will leave it for him. Linka asks what happened to Xiaonan, and the warrior says that he chose the hardest path to become stronger. Looking at the frightened Linke, Pandora says that Xiaonan is doing all this only for her. While Pandora controls Xiaonan's real body, we are transported to a desert where a trail of lonely footprints can be seen. A silhouette in a cloak, reminiscent of a blonde man, moves through the deserted fields. At some point, the person reaches the cliff and stops. From above, he looks down on the endless sand dunes, across which the wind blows sand. Xiaonan doesn't understand what this place is, but he's been here long enough to sweat. The boy remembers that his soul left his body at the moment when Pandora pierced him with a spear and took possession of his body. The warrior separated his consciousness and teleported Xiaonan to an unknown location. Xiaonan is convinced that this should somehow help him create a world key. The guy looks around and sees nothing but rocks and sand. The blonde doesn't know how long he'll be here, but first he needs to find water and food. Suddenly his gaze is attracted by a rodent, which is eating rare blades of grass and does not pay attention to the guy. A kitchen cleaver instantly appears in the hungry guy's hand and he says that he saw meat. Xiaonan rushes towards the fleeing rodent, screaming furiously, urging the animal not to run away. At some point, the blonde stops and looks towards the fleeing rodent. The animal noticed the threat too late and froze in place as a huge shark-like creature emerged from the sand. Jumping out of the sand as if from the depths of the sea, the sand shark ate the rodent and dove back into the sand. The wind picked up the sand that had risen into the air and flew towards Xiaonan, blocking his view. The blonde noticed that the shark was heading towards him, and he started to run away, asking why such an unreasonable creature appeared in the desert. Despite Xiaonan's speed, the shark caught up with him without any problems, causing the guy to become indignant. The guy understands that he won't be able to escape from the sand shark, so he decides to attack first. Jumping into the air, he causes the shark to emerge from the sand, after which he materializes an explosive glove. When the shark opens its mouth to swallow the blonde, the glove sends a blast wave towards the predator. Xiaonan lands on his feet and asks if this is enough for the monster to eat. The shark's mouth is burning and it lets out a terrible howl of pain. The shark's convulsions create a whole wave of sand that sweeps the blonde off his feet. Xiaonan is unable to resist this and is buried under sand and small rock fragments. When the guy manages to get up from the ground, he realizes that his left arm is broken. He remembers Pandora's words that if he dies in a state of mind, then he will truly die. Xiaonan raises his good hand up and summons the God Soldier record. Before the shark can reach him, a rocket appears in front of the guy, on which he escapes. Xiaonan thinks that if he hadn't been able to dodge and that creature had bitten him, the boy would have definitely died. However, he rejoices too soon because, distracted by the shark that was chasing him, he does not notice the sandy hand blocking his path. When Xiaonan notices the threat, it is too late and he crashes into the object. The rocket dissolves into thin air and Xiaonan falls onto the sand, breaking several ribs. The guy looks up at the strange object and hopes that it is not death. Xiaonan looks at the object towering above him and asks if they have any textbooks for beginners. His eyes begin to close, but through the darkness he hears Linka asking him to wake up. Xiaonan finds herself back in the well, sees Linka, and asks her for forgiveness for what happened to her legs. The girl hugs the blonde and says that even now he still worries about her. Xiaonan looks up at the light that barely reaches the bottom of the well and says it hurts. The image of the well changes to a huge humanoid monster with huge hands. It stretches its hands towards Xiaonan, and he begins to think about how it has started to get dark around. Before the monster can touch the blonde, he is hit by shots that force him to change his movement coordinates. A huge head with one hole resembling an eye turns in the direction from which the arrows came. At a distance from them, on a sand dune, stood a large metal cat, on which sat a red-haired archer. She pulled back the bowstring and fired another shot straight into the monster's chest and quickly descended towards Xiaonan. She grabbed the guy by the collar, who was on the verge of life and death. While the monster was still in the dark, she threw the guy's body in front of her onto the cat and they began to move away. Xiaonan looked at the girl in surprise and asked who she was and why she saved him. The girl looked at the blonde and, wiping the saliva from her lips, said only 2 words: man and food. Sand rose into the air behind the cat running through the desert. The girl held Xiaonan tightly by the collar, and it began to dawn on her that she called him food. The stranger periodically glanced at the blonde, and her drooling continued. Xiaonan decided that he needed to escape and began to materialize weapons. Having created something resembling an anchor on a chain, the guy threw it into the sand. The anchor caught on something hard, stopped, and Xiaonan was able to escape from the girl's hands. The guy landed on his feet but hit his left arm, so he said it hurt. As soon as he raised his head, a rope was thrown around his neck. The girl stopped and threw a lasso around the guy's neck, preventing his escape. The girl pulled him towards herself with force, continuing to say that the guy was her lunch. Xiaonan is too weak after the encounter with the monsters and begins to approach the girl against his will. Suddenly, the sand under the big cat's paws begins to move and they begin to get sucked in. The girl looked around and said that they had fallen into the clutches of the god of death. White thorns appeared in a circle around Xiaonan and the girl, resembling the fangs of a large creature. The guy started looking around, trying to figure out how they could escape. Before the giant creature's mouth closed, the girl jumped off the cat, pulling Xiaonan down with her. The body of a huge needle-like worm began to emerge from the sand dunes. This monster with many sharp teeth went after the girl and the boy in an attempt to eat them. The girl continued to pull on the rope that was tied around Xiaonan's neck, and it began to irritate him. Having materialized a sword, the blonde cut the rope. The guy turned towards the monster, thinking that at this rate, sooner or later, they would catch up with him. The death god stopped in front of Xiaonan, looking forward to it, and the boy said that they would fight to the death. Out of the corner of his eye, the blonde sees a frozen girl and wonders if she's going to fight with him. The girl, in turn, looks at Xiaonan in shock and asks if he is a soldier. The guy is distracted for a second and asks how she found out about this. However, he is distracted by a sharp sound coming from somewhere above. Looking up, Xiaonan notices a silhouette high in the sky, standing on a small platform floating in the sky. Obeying the man's command, the sand begins to rise upward, revealing the body of the god of death. The guy with white hair pulls the sand towards himself, and we see familiar green pixels. At the stranger's command, the sand turns into a multitude of swords. The guy swings his hand, thereby directing all the swords towards the monster. The huge swords, although made of sand, are very durable, so they pierce the monster's body right through. The defeated death god falls at Xiaonan's feet and does not move again. The white-haired boy suddenly descends and lands on the ground next to Xiaonan. A guy passes by a blonde man and asks a girl named Xiaoyu why she is cowering. The red-haired girl points toward Xiaonan and says that he is a man who attracts the god of death. The stranger turns to the side and calls out to someone named Little Pan. As if from nowhere, a giant robot appears in front of them with a girl sitting on its shoulder. The guy with white hair orders them to dig up the materials, and the robot immediately gets to work. A girl named Pan jumped off the robot's shoulder and walked up to them, saying that they should give this job to Puffy. The girl looks very similar to Pandora, but looks much younger than the warrior Xiaonan knows. Noticing Xiaonan standing nearby, she runs up to him and asks where he is from and whether he is a foreigner. The girl asks the blonde to tell her something about the outside world, for example, what they eat and where. Xiaonan notices the resemblance to the warrior, but when he saw the girl's eyes, he decided to confirm it by asking her directly what her name was. They are distracted from their conversation by a guy with white hair who calls Little Pan to him. The guy looks unhappy and tells the girl not to talk to strangers. The girl walks away from Xiaonan in shame, moving closer to the speaker. Xiaonan thinks that this is the guy Pandora told him about earlier and guesses that communication will not be easy. A white-haired guy approaches a blonde guy and asks his name. After learning the name, the guy says that he understands his intentions, but cannot give Xiaonan what he needs. The blonde looks back at him and doesn't understand what the guy is talking about. Xiaonan decides to ask him what he means, but the guy rushes at him and wounds the blonde in the stomach. It was as if all the strength had been taken from the blonde's body and he fell onto the sand, unable to stand. Veins spread across Xiaonan's forehead and he shook, asking the white-haired boy what he did to him. A sword is stuck into the sand next to the blonde's face. The stranger sits down next to the blonde man and apologizes to him, saying that Xiaonan is not yet qualified enough. The guy says that Xiaonan wants quick access and his desires consume him, but the guy himself does not understand this. The stranger gives the blonde a sword and says that he must do it himself. Sometime later, Xiaoyu, Little Pan, and the white-haired boy are riding through the desert on the puffball. Pan asks the guy if this is the man she was told about earlier and if his brother will do with him what he said. The boy strokes little Pan's head and says that one day the time will come. A system cube, which Xiaonan had previously used, appears on the white-haired boy's hand. The guy admits that he is very disappointed with this meeting. Meanwhile, Xiaonan tries to get up from the ground, leaning on the abandoned sword, and looks after the departing squad. While the blonde man tries to find a way to create the key of the worlds, we are transported to the lair of Zichen, the master of the beast world. He asks his subordinates why the fox girl did not return after the mission. No one answers him, so he turns to the system and asks if they are afraid of him. Zichen says he won't kill them for what they say, so he waits for an answer. However, he still doesn't receive an answer. So after some time, he says that it doesn't matter. The man throws small colored balls on the table and says that since they are afraid of him, they can take their animal soul and leave. The wolf closest to the table grabs the sphere with its soul. He takes off and tries to run away, but keeps looking back, expecting them to run after him. But this does not happen because the wolf stops himself. The sphere with his soul falls apart, and he asks the master why he did this to him. Like the soul, the wolf falls apart. The man gets up from his chair and says that it is very comfortable and nice. He is glad that the strongest feelings in him are caused by the cry of imminent death. Zichen turns to the tied-up boy, guarded by 2 leopard men, and asks if he has anything to say. This guy turns out to be the beaten Qifan. He says that he doesn't know anything and that Xiaonan has some kind of superpower. He says that he saw a guy create a rare weapon, so he decided to pay him some money to make a weapon for him too. The man snaps his fingers and says that in that case, he doesn't need Qifan. One of the leopard men guarding Qifan releases his claws, preparing to deal with the guy. With the threat of death, the guy decides to tell something else, so he begs them to stop. He tells about his meeting with Xiaonan at the city dump, which attracts Jichen's attention. Qifan said that the ability Xiaonan used in the dump was something he had never used before. The leopard freezes in place, waiting for a direct order from its owner. The man looks angrily at the beast and asks what he is waiting for. There is a loud scream, followed by silence. Zichen wonders if the northern city dump is indeed the source of these mysterious powers. The man remembers his childhood. He was very small, but his eyes clearly showed the horror happening around him. They were at home with their father when someone started knocking on the door. The father ordered his son to hide under the bed and not come out until he called him. Zichen barely has time to crawl under the bed when the uninvited guests knock down the door. The strangers demanded money from the father and said that he would not be able to hide. The man said he had no money, so people started beating him. Little Zichen did not dare to disobey his father, so he lay quietly under the bed and cried at what he had to see. At some point, the father stopped showing signs of life, and after that, the boy got scared and crawled out from under the bed. The men who beat his father fled their home, leaving the man alone with his crying son. The boy rushed into his father's arms, and he turned out to be still alive. So he began to ask his son for forgiveness. The man gave his son a gold watch and said that it was the only thing he could give him. Jichen's father told him that he must survive and then fell down dead. The boy understood that he couldn't wait for the robbers, so he decided to leave the house as quickly as possible. The frightened boy walked across the bridge and looked around, expecting a threat. He was surrounded by several people who asked the boy what he was doing there. The gang leader approached the boy and said that this was his world. Another guy came up to the boy from behind and pulled a gold watch out of his pocket. The boy said it was his father's watch. The man looked at it and said it was a fake and the boy wouldn't get anything for it. The men began to laugh at him, saying that his father had deceived him, but Zichen did not want to believe them. The boy clenched his fists and told them to give him the watch immediately. The leader sits down in front of the boy and asks if the boy knows what will make him happy. Without waiting for an answer, the man says that he will be happy when he breaks the boy's bones. The man grabs Zichen by the shoulder and asks if he wants to try it. Due to fear and stress, the boy wet himself, causing the men to laugh at him. The gang decided not to touch Zichen and prepared to leave, and the leader threw the watch into the water, saying that it really was worth nothing. There was a splashing sound, accompanied by the noise of people leaving the bridge. Zichen couldn't afford to lose the only thing left of his father, so he went into the water to find the watch. He walked along the bottom with a stick for a long time, hoping to find the lost thing, but all was not crowned with success. At some point, Zichen heard a growl behind him and turned around to say that even he was trying to scare him. In the water opposite the boy stood a large black wolf. The creature roared loudly and rushed at Zichen. The boy could do nothing. He had no strength or opportunity to defend himself. The wolf jumped on Zichen, forcing him to dive under the water and sank its teeth into his shoulder. The boy can only think about why all this is happening to him. Jichin believes that weakness is a great sin because the world was originally ruled by the strong. A force erupts from the boy's body, calling for him to use his power to eat them all. The system told the boy that when he absorbed all his offenders, he would become so strong that he would become the king of this world. This is the story of how Jichin, the master of the animal world, obtained the system. Now he has grown up and has given his offenders their just deserts, and now sits in his own world and looks at the watch that was given to him by his father with a smile on his face. He believes that as long as there is something that concerns the soldier's world, he should have it. The man believes that if the old man did not give away his property, then there is no need for their family. Back in the desert, where Xiaonan is trying to learn the secrets of the craft, we see him fighting a sphere. In the sphere is a white-haired guy who tells the blonde guy to give up, since he couldn't even get him to draw his sword. Xiaonan has lost weight, looks tired, and asks for his strength to be restored. The white-haired guy is adamant. He says the blonde guy is not good enough. His words made Xiaonan grit his teeth in anger. He makes another attempt to reach the stranger. In the blink of an eye, the guy creates a hammer out of sand and hits Xiaonan with it. The force of the blow sends the blonde flying to the side. The white-haired boy thinks that Xiaonan won't get up again, so he lowers his guard. He orders Xiao Yu to come over and take the sword from the blonde man, thus allowing him to finally surrender. Suddenly, sand flies past the guy, gathering into a large shape behind him. A huge sandy hand shows the middle finger to a white-haired guy. He looks at his hand in surprise because he didn't expect this to happen. After a few moments, he starts laughing and says since the world chose this guy, he definitely won't stick to this form. He tells Xiaonan that once he gets out of this system, he will be qualified enough to take on his challenge. Meanwhile, in a remote part of the desert, two silhouettes are visible. They are currently digging a hole. Pandora stands next to the gray-haired old man and watches him dig. The girl asks him what he wants to dig up, but he corrects her, saying that he wants to plant something. The girl is not satisfied with his answer, and then she asks what exactly he wants to plant. The old man, whose face is half hidden by a mask, replies that he wants to plant hope. We are transported to abandoned buildings and see open gates. Someone's hand touches a barrier that cannot be passed or removed. We see Xiaonan's body, which is currently being controlled by Pandora. The warrior had long ago noticed the presence of a stranger, so she tells him to come out. Ansui comes out from around the corner with a smile on his face and asks when he was discovered. Xiaonan says that this has been clear for a long time and asks what the guy is doing here. Ansui comes closer and says that he didn't see the blonde guy in class today, so he started to worry. The guy also says that he has a few questions for his friend that he would like to ask him personally. Pandora doesn't like his tone, so she materializes a sword and warns Ansuya not to come near. The warrior rushes at the guy and he starts screaming and asking his friend to calm down. However, contrary to his expectations, the sword flies past Ansuya and pierces the wolfman standing behind him. Flipping in midair, Xiaonan pushes the beast aside, blocking Ansuya. The wolf begins to choke due to his throat being pierced and falls to the ground. Xiaonan comes closer and presses his foot on the wolf's face, pinning it to the ground. A frightened Ansui runs closer to his friend. He asks Xiaonan what just happened. Pandora thinks that Ansui in the blonde's memories always remained the best friend who could be trusted. Xiaonan says that he has obtained the power of the soldier world, which is the power of the animal world, and that they can absorb each other to become stronger. Ansui thought it was just superpowers, but now he understands why so many strange things have happened recently. Ansui asks if they can both become stronger without engaging in fighting and killing. Xiaonan looks at the boy and asks if he has heard of the Dark Forest Law. The blonde man explains that in the Dark Forest, you can't judge whether your companions are good-natured, because you can't tell whether you are the hunter or the hunted. Xiaonan extracts the soul from the beast, and Pandora thinks that the quality of this soul is too low. Ansui meanwhile asks whether Xiaonan is the hunter or the hunted, and he replies that he is, of course, the hunter. Pandora thinks that all of this could be considered a bow and arrow that Xiaonan is temporarily unable to use. The guys don't say anything else, but something attracts Ansuya's attention. He rushes toward Xiaonan and knocks him down, saving him from the refrigerator flying towards them. A few moments later, the boys find themselves on the ground, and Ansui pins the blonde down. Pandora became embarrassed and began to push away the bewildered Ansuya, shouting that he did not dare touch her. Suddenly, a voice is heard saying that they did not expect to see such an unexpected harvest here. A crowd of beastmen heads towards the guys, wanting to catch Xiaonan in order to become the strongest under the master's command. The blonde hands Ansuyu a bat and he asks in fear what kind of monsters these are. Pandora wonders what could have happened to Xiaonan that it even affected her own powers. The blonde man begins to fight off the animals and shouts at Ansuyu to run away as soon as he has the chance. The guy wields the bat well and fights off the animals that approach him. Hearing Xiaonan's words, he tells him not to joke, because they will only leave together. As soon as he finishes his sentence, his gaze freezes. Looking down, Ansui sees several claws sticking out from his stomach. Xiaonan looks angrily at the culprit of this incident, Jichen. The man looks back at him with glowing red eyes and says that their first meeting has finally happened. We are transported back to the desert and see a cave illuminated by a large hole in the ceiling. Xiaonan can be seen through the metal gate, holding a huge cannon in his hand. He just tried to pass the white-haired guy's test again, and now he's trying to catch his breath. Xiaonan asks if he did it, and the guy replies that he completed the task even faster than he did. The stranger thinks that now the warrior world has hope and orders the blonde to descend. Xiaonan managed to complete the task and defeat the huge desert scorpion. Now the boys leave the battlefield together, and the mentor says that the blonde's powers have reached the level of 2 stars and even higher. He praises Xiaonan for his unrivaled imagination, but says that it is still quite small, which limits the warrior. After listening to the comments, Xiaonan says that even with his strength, he still can't create a dual-star weapon. The white-haired guy says that the blonde guy will be able to do this when he can see the world clearly, and then he will get the answer to getting the key to the world. Xiaonan doesn't understand what he's talking about, and then the mentor says that everything in this world has its own soul. There is a soul in a small pebble and a mountain range, in the earth, the sea, and the sky. As the master of the soldiers, Xiaonan must see souls and use their power to forge the soldiers' destinies. The secret to achieving true 2 stars is to unite souls. Different types of showers have different uses, so if there are products that work well with others, that's the key. Xiaonan asks how one can see souls, and the master says that he will see them when he experiences a vibration at the moment of separation of his soul from his body. The blonde thinks about his words and tries to figure out how he can separate the soul from the body. His thoughts are interrupted by an inner voice that says that Xiaonan must return urgently. The mentor does not hear this voice, but from the blonde's reaction, he understands that it is his time to get out of here. The elder says that the boy has already learned everything he needs to know, and he will understand the rest later. Watching Xiaonan disappear, the mentor tells the blonde to call him master the next time they meet. Xiaonan's soul begins to return to his real body, displacing Pandora. He is held by the neck by Jishen, who says that despite the fact that he gave him so much time, Xiaonan has disappointed him. The blonde tries to understand where he ended up, but his gaze falls on Ansuya lying on the ground. The man holds Xiaonan by the neck in the air, preventing the boy from speaking properly. Jichin says that people like Xiaonan cannot obtain such power and there is clearly something wrong here. The man's eyes burn with anger and he summons one of his beasts. In the blink of an eye, a huge snake appears above their heads. Jichin says that he doesn't want to waste his precious time talking to a person like Xiaonan. The man orders the snake to eat the blonde man and the beast immediately opens its mouth, preparing to swallow its victim. Before Jichin can throw Xiaonan into the jaws of death, his hand holding the blonde is cut off. The blonde seemed to gain strength and managed to escape from captivity, leaving Jichin and the snake alone. Xiaonan's speed of movement allowed him to pick up the unconscious Ansuya and escape. Jichin climbed onto the snake's head and ordered his subordinates to give chase. The beastmen rushed after Xiaonan, fulfilling their master's order. The blonde knew he couldn't escape that easily, so he turned around and started creating obstacles. Several concrete pillars appeared from the ground, blocking the animal's path. Ansui woke up and asked why he felt that Xiaonan had changed a little, but the blonde asked him to keep quiet. The friend smiles and asks not to worry because he is healthy, but when talking, blood starts flowing from his mouth. Ansui laughs and tries to get up, saying that he doesn't even feel pain. However, as soon as Xiaonan stopped holding him, the boy fell to the ground. Suddenly, Pandora appeared next to them, examined Ansuya, and said that his injury was too serious. She turned to Xiaonan and said that they needed to move him to a safe place for a while. The girl doesn't hear an answer, so she tries to call the blonde again. He still remains silent, and then Pandora asks how Xiaonan can remain so calm. Yellow energy rushes through the blonde's body, and he says that he finally understood the phrase of Mentor G about opening the eyes. With tears in his eyes, he says that he now sees the color of the human soul. The girl looks at Xiaonan in fascination and thinks that she is beginning to see an old acquaintance. At this time, Jichin breaks the barrier between them and rushes forward. The man is also burning with power and says that this is exactly the kind of Xiaonan he has been waiting for so long. It is precisely this kind of patron of soldiers who is worthy of being swallowed by the master of the beast world. Xiaonan's eyes resemble Pandora's, and he looks around, saying that he can see everything now. Indeed, instead of people, creatures, and objects, he sees their souls, each of which has its own color. Now that he sees them, the guy can separate them. Having materialized the sword, Xiaonan begins to cut souls and separate them from their bodies. All animals approaching him are struck by the sword. But instead of hurting their bodies, Xiaonan separates their souls. Many souls leave their bodies and intertwine together, heading towards a new owner. The souls are transformed into the bodies of the beasts that were imprisoned by Zichen, and Xiaonan tells them that they are now free. He does not capture souls, but sends them to rest, thereby leaving Zichen without subordinates. The man's claws lengthen and he screams that he has been collecting these souls for a very long time. Zichen thrusts his hand into the snake's head and threatens to kill them all. Having torn a piece of flesh from the snake, the man begins to consume it, which does not go unnoticed by Xiaonan. Pandora says that the animal world is so terrible and disgusting, no matter what generation it is. A huge clot of strange energy appears in front of Xiaonan, and Zichen threatens that the blonde will pay for everything. Having absorbed the soul of the snake, Zichen transformed into a huge monster. Xiaonan does not feel any doubt about his victory, so he rushes into battle. The blonde separates the souls and transforms them into a large sword of 2 stars. Pandora looks at Xiaonan in surprise and asks how he learned it so quickly. The blonde doesn't answer her and jumps in the air to reach Zichen. He raises his sword over the monster's head and says that he will cut it into pieces. However, Zichen has no intention of evading. Xiaonan realizes this too late and does not notice the fist flying towards him. A giant hand knocks the blonde man down and he falls to the ground. Pandora shouts at Xiaonan. She is worried about him. The blonde guy is bleeding from his mouth and he asks how this can be. He looks at his broken sword and can't believe how strong Zichen is that he was able to break a 2-star equipment. The monster, resembling a giant modified wolf, begins to laugh. Zichen is that monster and he says he will make Xiaonan suffer. Pandora says that the man has united the souls of the beasts and reached the 3 stars, so Xiaonan needs to use the soul separation technique. The blonde says that this ability has a time limit, but 1 hit will be enough for him. The monster grabs Xiaonan and asks him what he is saying. Zichen squeezes his hand, thereby squeezing the blonde's body. Pandora materializes a weapon and rushes at the monster, demanding that Xiaonan be released. Before she can reach Jichen's torso, a large shadow looms over her. With 1 blow, the monster smashes Pandora into the ground. The monster says that the girl is just a crippled soldier, so it is beyond her power. At the sight of the impact, a hole is formed in the ground from which no sound can be heard. Zichen tells Xiaonan that he will not let him die as easily as Ansui. The blonde says that the man is talking about his best friend, and he is the most precious person to him. Looking up, Xiaonan says that someone like Zichen will never understand this. The blonde assumes that the man has been alone his whole life. Zichen is haunted by memories of wandering the streets after his father's death, with no one to help him. The man becomes angry at the painful memories and throws Xiaonan aside. Zichen tells the blonde to go to hell and begins to form energy in his mouth. When enough energy has been collected, the monster directs it towards Xiaonan, who had been thrown back earlier. When the smoke clears, a golden cocoon appears in Xiaonan's place, unharmed by the attack. The ground around the cocoon is destroyed, but there is not a scratch on it. Zichen looks at this in shock and cannot understand how this could happen. From the cocoon comes Xiaonan's voice, saying that when he first met Ansu, the blonde was being bullied, and his friend rushed to his aid. Ansui is an only child, has never fallen in love, has a good relationship with his parents, and his father taught boys how to communicate with girls. Ansui is a person who loves to fight injustice. He's usually easygoing and optimistic. Xiaonan emerges from the sphere and begins to form a weapon, saying that Ansui dreams of becoming a professional tennis player. The blonde man swings his sword and says that because of Zichen, his friend's dream will never come true. Xiaonan's eyes show anger and sadness, and he says that he will kill Zichen with his own hands. Pandora emerges from a hole in the ground and says that Xiaonan has a broken soul in his hands that can only be used 9 times in his life. The girl is surprised that the mentor taught the blonde even this technique. Pandora overhears the master asking her why she is angry with him now that he has become an old man. Her consciousness is transferred to a space where she sees an aged master. She looks at her old friend in surprise and cannot believe her eyes. The old man says that the girl is doing well on her own and that Xiaonan is very good and he can continue their endeavors. The girl rushes to her old friend and hugs him. Pandora cries and asks the old man why he left and didn't take her with him. The old man transforms and says that the girl is very smart and should not expose herself to danger. Pandora says she can do better, but the guy tells her that she is already the only one who can contact the soldier world. The girl looks at her friend and asks how he can speak if he is only a memory left by this world to choose the next master. Jishiki says that he left his soul behind to be reborn when a new world master is chosen. Shiki tenderly tells Pandora that he has very little time left. He is going to tell the girl the real reason why he stayed in the soldier world. Meanwhile, we return to the battle between Xiaonan and Jichen. The monster says that the guy is really strong, but his wound is not perfect. The sword from the split soul begins to crumble in Xiaonan's hands. The blonde was exhausted, as he was not used to this type of battle. His gaze is drawn to lightning coming from a hole in the ground, and he feels the tremors of the soldier's world. Pandora appears next to Xiaonan and tells him to grab this energy as it was sent by Shiki. Before the blonde can react, Jichen punches the hole with his fist. Grabbing the energy, he brings it to himself. Jichen examines the energy, saying that it now belongs only to him. The monster says he feels great power. Xiaonan and Pandora freeze in place and don't know what to do now. Jichen opens his mouth and is about to absorb the energy, saying that now no one can stop him. Before he can do so, 2 arrows are pierced through his arm. Xiaonan holds a crossbow in his hands and says that Jichen must not forget about him. The monster wants to grab the blonde, but there is a thread attached to the arrows, which gets his hand tangled. Xiaonan fires several shots into the ground on one side of Jichen, after which he shoots several more times in the opposite direction. Jichen's arm is immobilized and he realizes that Xiaonan used steel wire. Having partially immobilized his target, Xiaonan puts away his crossbow and lands in the distance. The blonde thinks that this wire is made of the strongest material he can synthesize, so he will stop the monster. Xiaonan notices Pandora walking past him towards Jichen. She asks if the blonde really didn't understand what the girl told him earlier. Pandora creates a weapon and says that with his current strength, Xiaonan won't be able to stop the monster. The girl walks towards Jichen and tells the blonde to leave everything to her and run away. Xiaonan says that Ansui died because of Jichen, and the girl wants him to just run away. The blonde says that he is a master of the soldier world, so he will be able to figure out the enemy's weak point and defeat him. Pandora looks at Xiaonan doubtfully. She remembers Shiki's words that she could help Xiaonan just as she helped him. An old friend told her that if she stayed with the blonde man, she would feel endless possibilities and hope. Pandora smirks and says that the old man brings her a lot of difficulties. Her good memories are interrupted by Jichen's voice, who says that they are very naive. The monster says they can't stop his evolution. Jichen collects energy in his mouth and directs it to his right hand, which is chained to the ground. Xiaonan guesses that he wants to be freed, so Pandora says that they must not let him evolve or he will destroy the entire city. The blonde looks at the monster in amazement and does not understand why he does not feel pain. There is a loud roar, and the dust that rises into the air hides Jichen's body from Xiaonan's sight. A large metal paw hits the ground, and Jichen says that pain is just a word he is familiar with. However, for such a generous reward, it is not worthy of mention. Now the monster's entire body is covered in metallic golden armor, and Jichen says that he has managed to get close to the 4 stars. The monster throws his paws up and laughs, saying that he is experiencing a wonderful feeling. Xiaonan barely holds on to avoid being blown away by the strong wind currents and thinks about how he allowed Jichen to succeed. When the blonde manages to raise his head, he is frightened by what he was able to see. Pandora rushed at Jichen with a spear in her hands. However, this did not go unnoticed by the monster, and he is already preparing to throw the girl aside. Their attacks collide, causing a flash of light to appear. Seeing this, Xiaonan recalls one sunny day. The streets are filled with people rushing about their business. Xiaonan goes about his business. He says he was going to go out and relax. Noticing a silhouette behind him, he asks what the girl is doing here, since he has already defeated her. But the girl says that this dimension is not at all like reality. Pandora comes to meet him, dressed in clothes that are unusual for her, and says that the guy has no idea what she is capable of. Xiaonan asks where she got these things, and the girl says that she used his internet account to buy them. Pandora says that within a year, she will surpass Xiaonan in every way. The guy turns away and says that it is, hoping that the girl will leave him alone. Xiaonan tells her not to wander around here because an eccentric person like her could be caught up in the investigation at any moment. Pandora was outraged by his words and said that he should watch himself more carefully. The girl's speech is interrupted by a loud sound that resounds above her head. A large plane flies over the city. The girl sees this object for the first time and it makes her scared. With a scream, she rushes towards Xiaonan and hugs him, hiding her face. The plane, however, continued to gain altitude calmly as it had just departed from the airport. After a while, Xiaonan decides to calm the girl down and hands her some ice cream, explaining that it is a cold dessert. The girl is in no hurry to accept it, which is why the guy starts making fun of her. Pandora snatches the dessert from his hands and swears that she will make him pay if it doesn't taste good. However, as soon as the girl tried the ice cream, her face reflected delight, and she said that it was very sweet. Xiaonan watched her and thought that despite her seriousness, she was still a little girl at heart. But looking at how the girl now rushed into battle, he thinks about what made her do this. All her attacks do not harm Zichen, and he says that Pandora only tickles him. Xiaonan is afraid that something bad might happen to the girl, so he demands that she come back and they retreat. Pandora begins to gather all her energy and asks Xiaonan to never make mistakes. She is Pandora, the spirit of the soldier world, the sword of the soldier lord, and her duty is to always protect Xiaonan. The light from her power begins to blind Zichen and he closes his eyes. The girl strikes the monster, demanding that he give up the power that belongs to the world of soldiers. Taking the power that Shiki gave them from Zichen, Pandora passes it on to Xiaonan. The monster is going to crush the girl, saying that she is a fire that decided to fight with Luca. With a smile on her face, Pandora asks Xiaonan to use this power wisely, and the crystal on her chest begins to crumble. The blonde man looks in shock at the girl who sacrificed herself to save his life. Zichen clasps his hands and Pandora disappears from Xiaonan's sight. When the monster opens his arms, only gold dust remains in the place of the girl. Xiaonan looks at what is happening in shock and cannot believe what has happened. He falls to his knees, unable to bear all that has fallen upon him. Xiaonan begins to shake with the realization that Pandora is no more. Zichen asks with a grin if it hurts to see loved ones die one after another. The monster raises his hand and asks if Xiaonan wants to go after them. Under the weight of pain and sorrow, Xiaonan cannot answer him. Suddenly, pieces of steel begin to chip off from Zichen's claws. The monster looks at his hand and does not understand whether this is due to the blow he received or because he is not yet accustomed to the force he received. Dark energy begins to thicken around Xiaonan and Zichen. The monster says he will let the blonde live a little longer. Zichen absorbs the power and says that when he is done, Xiaonan will have to die. The guy himself, meanwhile, continues to sit on his knees and clutch what Pandora had previously given him. The guy looks at the stone that the girl gave him and asks why she did it. Pandora tried so hard to get this thing back, but Xiaonan doesn't understand what it is. He punches the ground, angry at himself. Xiaonan remembers Ansuya, who suffered because of him. Remembers the dying Pandora, who gave everything to get this item back. Xiaonan asks them for forgiveness and says that it is all his fault. From the thickening fog of energy, a silhouette appears, saying that it is indeed the blonde's fault. Hearing a familiar voice, Xiaonan raises his head. The same guy stands in front of him, but a few years younger, and says that if the guy weren't so weak, no one would hurt him. From the speech of little Xiaonan, we understand that this is Zichen, who has taken his form. Zichen says that Ansui died because he was a nuisance, and Pandora died because she did meaningless things. Pointing at Xiaonan, Zichen said that if this was all a game, then the blonde man had lost it. A large cage surrounded by chains appears around the blonde. Xiaonan grabs her bars and asks if he has reached a dead end. The blonde refuses to believe that all of Pandora's actions were meaningless. Looking at the strange thing, Xiaonan says that this scabbard must mean something. Zichen is starting to get irritated by his persistence. Lately, Xiaonan has forgotten what he is really good at, because if it is a game, then he needs to defeat the boss. After hearing Zichen's words, the blonde man realized that Pandora had done all this in order to give him the correct answer. The illusion begins to dissolve into a dark fog of energy. The fog clears and Xiaonan sees a large monster in front of him again. Zichen thought that the effect of absorbing energy was usually instantaneous, but now he felt a sense of emptiness and detachment. The monster thinks that he doesn't have enough time for the energy to be absorbed into his body, but it's enough to deal with Xiaonan. But while he was thinking, something began to happen that he did not expect. Xiaonan gathered his courage and began to create a new sword. From the item that Pandora gave him, Xiaonan decided to create her prototype. From the received item, the blonde managed to assemble only the hilt of the sword. Jichin strikes, but Xiaonan manages to jump aside. The monster starts to get angry and says that if the guy doesn't stop hoping, then he himself will cut off his hope. Opening his mouth, Jichin releases energy and directs it towards Xiaonan. The spirits of the wolves rush towards the blonde. Seeing this, the boy continues creating the sword, finishing with the blade. With a few simple strikes, Xiaonan cuts the souls into several pieces. The blonde was not mistaken. The scabbard is part of Pandora, and this artifact is capable of absorbing other weapons, which makes this soul a 5-star. The energy from the sword is similar in strength to the breath of the key of the world, but much stronger, causing Jichin to ask what Xiaonan is holding in his hand. The blonde replies that the monster will never be able to understand this, even if you explain it many times. Xiaonan clutches the hilt in his hand and says that this can be called an inheritance or a shackle. The blonde turns his gaze to Jichin. He is now certain that Jichin has absorbed the soldier's soul, which was originally contained in the scabbard. Pointing his hand at the monster, Xiaonan commanded the soldier's soul to respond. After his words, Jichin's eyes widened as the pain pierced his body. The next moment, his body began to crack, from which soul energy began to emerge. This energy tore Jichin apart from the inside, as if he were not a strong enough shell. Xiaonan slowly approached the monster. Instead of a monster, he saw Jichin in human form, who was outraged that he was not allowed to absorb the souls of these soldiers. The man had no strength left and asked what right Xiaonan had to play games with him. The blonde man said that people like Jichin would never repent of their actions, so he should get what he deserved. The man began to beg Xiaonan for mercy, promising that he would definitely change. The blonde orders him to repent and go to hell, after which he cuts off Jichin's head. Meanwhile, in the space of the battle world, the old man is meditating. Feeling that everything ended as it should, Shiki says he knew the guy could do it. Looking up at the sky, the old man said that he expected nothing less from his disciple. The column on which the old man had been sitting all this time began to wobble. Shiki struck her with his hand, forcing her to regain her balance. He used his power to order her to remain still while he was having fun. A funnel appears high in the sky, from which lightning bursts forth. They pierce the column, which in reality turned out to be a giant sword. At this time, the sword blade in Xiaonan's hands began to dissolve. The blonde watched the souls fly away and thought that he felt sorry for the souls of these soldiers. Pandora's voice comes from the hilt of the sword, saying that she needs to rest for a while. Xiaonan is glad to hear her, and the girl asks him to be careful, because in the world of soldiers, not only the master of beasts. The blonde says that now he doesn't have to defend himself, at least from Zishen. Turning to Jichin's body, Xiaonan sees his soul begin to leave his body. The blonde looks in surprise as the soul begins to take shape. There is a little boy standing in front of him who says that he is not good enough to move forward. However, the boy is not speaking to Xiaonan, but to his father, whose soul placed a hand on his son's shoulder and praised him for his efforts. The man invited the boy to go home with him, and little Jichin, with a smile on his face, agreed. Taking his son by the hand, the man began to walk away and their souls began to disperse. Xiaonan watched from the side, and when the souls disappeared, he sighed with relief. The guy squatted down and said that it was finally all over and he was very tired. Xiaonan looked at the hilt of the sword and said that he had indeed killed all those people. The guy lies down on the ground and asks if he can live like a normal person. Suddenly, dark energy begins to gather around Xiaonan. Rising up, the boy sees that Jichin's body has transformed into the soul of a beast. Xiaonan was about to attack him, but pain shot through his entire body. Unable to swing his sword, the blonde falls back to the ground. Xiaonan was too weak due to overexerting his strength. The beast was already hovering over the blonde, ready to devour him at any moment. But Xiaonian couldn't move. At the last moment, a series of shots are fired, hitting the beast and killing it. Xiaonan looks at the falling body of the beast in shock. Turning his head in the direction from which the shots were coming, the blonde sees a female silhouette. A girl with white hair and 2 revolvers in her hands is walking towards him. She passes by Xiaonan to the body of the beast, and the blonde does not immediately understand who is in front of him, a guy or a girl. The stranger puts her hand into the beast's body and begins to look for something. After a few moments, she takes a red crystal out of her body. The girl opens her mouth and holds out the crystal. In an instant, she swallows a huge stone. The stranger taps her chest as if she's choking, and Xiaonan thinks that she's swallowed the core of the beast world. The blonde man gets up from the ground and calls the girl. As if sensing a threat, the girl points one of the revolvers at him. She shoots Xiaonan several times. From the force of the blows, the blonde falls to the ground again. The guy is suffering from pain and opens his eyes, looking at the girl who has approached. The stranger pointed a revolver at him, and Xiaonan thought that she was going to kill him now. However, she is prevented from doing so by a voice that orders her to stop. The stranger turns around and sees a dark-haired woman wearing glasses who is about to kick her. The blow was so strong that it broke the concrete surface, but the girl managed to jump to the side. Having shifted her center of gravity, the woman is about to deliver another blow. At that moment, the white-haired girl took 2 grenades from her belt and pulled out the pin. 2 activated grenades were thrown towards the woman who was shielding Xiaonan. The guy was very exhausted and thought that reinforcements had arrived for Zichen. The grenades explode, but the force of the explosion does not pass through the woman, saving Xiaonan. Due to the explosion, the brunette's arms were exposed, and it became clear that they were made of metal. The woman says that the target has disappeared and reports that the Zheng family is going to intervene in this matter. Xiaonan hears many footsteps slowly but surely approaching them. Several people in combat uniform approach the blonde man and put a metal collar around his neck. Xiaonan wants to ask what all this means, but before he can finish speaking, he loses consciousness. The woman on the phone reports that the soldier master has been successfully captured, but the soldier world has been taken away by the Zheng family. She informs Mr. W that they are a little late. The man says they have done a good job and orders the master soldier to be brought back. Mr. Yu hangs up and we see that he is not alone in the office. Next to him sits Linka, who looks sad.